Chapter 285 Bestial Nuptials Part 1. Faced with the impending assault of 7 otherworldly beauties, though undisturbed, Conrad's drunken eyes shone with seriousness. "Bring it on," he declared with soaring battle intent while unfastening his belt. But with the challenge accepted, the ladies didn't even wait for him to finish. "Jasmine, Ileana, Daphne, Nils, your 4 whelps at the vanguard. First, unleash your true forms. We 3 will cover the rear. Attack," Yvonne declared while aiming her index toward Conrad, motioning for the 4 whelps to charge. "As you command, General." The 4 whelps replied in tandem and released their suppressed energies. Upon his return, Conrad contracted Nils, Verena, and Else, then used the system to improve their bloodlines. After much deliberation, instead of making them Brahmas, the Devis of spiritual perfection and creators of paragon spirits, he used the system to turn both Verena and Nils into Maras, the Devis of dreams and temptation. Their silver eyes now turned magenta, and the move was about to bite him in the rear. True demon form. Jasmine and Ileana roared in tandem, releasing their demonic energies and assuming their demonic forms. Their pupils and sclera turned purple, their porcelain white skin morphed into blue. A pair of horns grew from their forehead, flesh wings emerged from their backs, their nails grew into sharp claws, and a tail sprouted from above their rears. At the same time, Daphne used her half-demon form, turned into a half-serpent, half-human demoness and glided toward Conrad in a lateral undulation. Of the 4, only Nils' true form remained human-looking. Her hairs glowed in white, pink light erupted from her form and shrouded her body while temptation fog of the same color spread throughout the atmosphere. Not falling behind, Jasmine and Ileana unleashed both their orchid sense and desire flames that assailed Conrad from all sides. By the time the flames and fog filled him, Daphne had wrapped herself around his torso, using her emerald serpent tail to undo his belt while her arms shredded his robe. Ileana, Jasmine, and Nils then pounced toward him, and the battle thus began. Conceited, Conrad sneered while the demonesses and Davies surrounded him from all sides. Not backing off, he released his own orchid scent and desire flames which spread throughout the room, effortlessly overpowering his consorts. Of course, with their current bloodlines, they didn't immediately turn into lust-crazed fiends. Still, the desire to devour Conrad's sword within their drunken minds, and as they grabbed him front, back, left, and right, it reached its acme. Meanwhile, Verena, Yvonne, and Else lied on the bed, observing the scene with rapt attention and ready to intervene should their sisters fail to handle the opponent. With his consort's bewitching abilities filling him, even without stimulation, Conrad's rod rose to attention. His imposing length and girth poking through Daphne's tail while Ileana and Jasmine's hands rubbed his perfect abs and muscular thighs. With her echidna tail, Daphne stroked the lower end of Conrad's meat rod while Jasmine and Ileana glided their hands across the sides and teased the tip. Even in their drunken state, they tended to his rod with a perfect balance of passion and care, their moves showcasing the depth of their feelings. With her inhibition out of the way, Nils joined the fray, grabbing Conrad's cheeks and pulling him into an ardent French kiss. Her tongue sought his, moving and twisting as if it wished to tour every nook and cranny of his mouth and devour all he had to offer. The silent spread of the desire flames carried on, heightening the already profound lust that boiled within the consorts. Daphne's hands sneaked on Conrad's nipples, pressing, tugging, and teasing them while her elongated tongue licked his neck and trailed his chest. Jasmine and Ileana then dropped on their knees, sticking out their tongues to lick the pulsing veins of Conrad's rod while cupping his balls within their hands. Daphne's tail stroked him harder, gliding across half his length as the succubus duo kissed and licked the other half. Conrad then released his second rod, allowing both of the demonesses to enjoy a full meal. Without hesitation, they each took one between their full cherry lip and sucked the cocks in. Conrad's rods glided past their tongues, poking at their throats. And as they went deeper, Jasmine's lips met Daphne's tail while Ileana's butted against Nils' soft hand. a hand that now refused to let her go further, tending to what lied beyond. With unconstrained lust filling the air and the tantalizing scene before them, Else, Verena, and Yvonne could no longer restrain themselves, and their hands now trailed their slowly dripping cunts. The nuptial bedchamber was now filled with a myriad of squishing sounds and muffled moans, and though Conrad seemed passive, the situation remained under his control. A second head and 2 pairs of arms grew from Conrad's body. Seeing this, Daphne snaked toward the second head, seizing its lips while Conrad's 4 hands stretched toward his consorts and caressed them at various angles. With one hand, he stroked Nil's clit and rubbed her labia. With another, he stuck his fingers into Daphne's slit. The last 2 then descended on Jasmine and Ileana's heads, patting and guiding them on his rods. Machim. The serpent Demonis and Temptation Devi moaned in his lips, while their sisters' slurping sounds echoed from below. In a flash, Conrad regained the initiative, and as his fingers wormed themselves within their tight, gripping tunnels, Nils and Daphne arched their backs, bending backward while his faces leaned forward and pressed them into defeat. Was it not for him holding them firm within his lips, their mouths would have already sprung free. But he didn't allow it, assailing them on 2 fronts while Jasmine and Ileana moved faster on his enlarged rod, taking it deeper into their throats without an ounce of difficulty. Their succubus throats vacuumed Conrad's rod with a pressure that would have shamed the average lovemaking expert into a succession of uncontrollable orgasms. But on Conrad, it was just right. Mhhhhhhm. Unable to resist Conrad's tongues and fingers any longer, Nils and Daphne climaxed on his hands, and he chose that moment to release 2 jets of spunk down Jasmine and Ileana's throats. But the clash was only getting started. Without delay, Conrad grabbed the 4 by the waist, holding each in suspension within one arm. Jasmine and Ileana soon found their soaked cunts on his lips, while Daphne and Nils were impaled on his rod. Oh! They groaned in delight and gasped as his tongues danced within their cunts and his rods impaled them. The squelching sounds merged with the sweaty slamming of flesh against flesh and balls against butt cheeks. Bent in various positions, all 4 took turns on Conrad's rods and fell to a succession of orgasms while his cum filled the entirety of their snatches. They then collapsed on the ground, utterly defeated. Round 1 is over, Conrad announced with 2 arms folded beneath his chest while his extra 2 stretched toward the mature trio that awaited on the bed. Although they hadn't expected the 4 to fall at such a rapid pace, Yvonne, Else, and Verena didn't lose courage, readying themselves for Conrad's assault by spreading their legs. Well, Your Majesty, round 2 now welcomes you. The trio retorted in tandem. Chapter 286 Bestial Nuptials Part 2. As he stepped toward them, Conrad's lips curled into a fiendish smile, and his body bathed in desire flames while golden and jade light swirled around his rods. Rods that still contained the mixed sexual juice and scent of his 4 previous partners. Yvonne vanished, reappearing behind Conrad to wrap her legs around his waist. Legs that soon turned into the scaly lower end of a serpent female. Meanwhile, Else and Verena stretched inviting hands toward Conrad, motioning for him to plow them with their eyes, not shirking from the predatory glint his golden hues freely showcased. Yvonne's mouth and teeth lowered on Conrad's right earlobe, licking and nibbling on it as he crawled onto the bed, and reached his 2 jade consorts who each placed one hand on his cheeks and another on his chests. Already, their ragged breathing echoed, forming a sultry melody that urged Conrad to cloak them with his Empyrean embrace and take them hard. With the previous round serving as their appetizer, they needed no further stimulation. Conrad kissed them both before bending into position. Verena lied above Else, her hourglass figure contrasting with Else's perfectly proportioned body while her big, perky but faced Conrad's licentious gaze. In that position, Verena's clit brushed Else's, electrifying them both in the process. Conrad flicked his tongue across their slits, just for good measure, then aligned his eager, pulsating meat rods with their entrances, poking them a little. The simple touch fired a wave of electricity through his jade consorts' bodies, and elicited moans from their divine lips. On, with his rods pressed against his jade consort's flower buds, the Jade Emperor wantonly teased them, forcing moans of frustration from their chanting lips. But as he enjoyed their dismay and possessed them with his scent, his Empress used her serpentine tail to apply pressure on his pelvis and slam him into them in a resounding squelching sound. Ooh! Conrad's dived into Verena and Elsa's cunts, forcing a groan from their throats. And in that groan, pleasant surprise echoed. And unwilling to let him control the pace, Yvonne took his lips into hers. Although she wasn't a lust demon, as a Hecaret, her half-demoness form was a natural lethal weapon that could play most men into blissful death. With her demonic saliva, she set Conrad's body ablaze while his rods butted against his consort's cervixes. With his golden and jade lights filling them, the entirety of their sex caves became pleasure den. Conrad gently tapped the back of Verena's head, lowering her face against Elsa's. Debauched bliss clouded their minds, making them abandon all sense of propriety to kiss one another. Conrad glided his rods to the entrance and, using slow motions that allowed him to appreciate every part of his consort's squeezing snatches, pushed them in and out. The slow pace only heightened their hunger, and they slammed their butts against Conrad, meeting his slow thrusts with wild ramming. His pace then shot up, and in a succession of rapid slapping sounds, the pounding began. Oh, oh, oh. Slapping, squelching, and throaty moaning sounds intertwined while Yvonne devoured Conrad's lips and applied more pressure on his pelvis to drive him faster into her harem sisters. And faster he went. His desire's flames erupted at full force, and his cocks pistoned the consort's insides while their snatches squeezed him tighter with every move, as if eager to swallow his load. But they didn't fall into passivity, meeting thrust for thrust, with blazing lustful passion. The room turned into a furnace where cauldrons burned against one another, without a care for the outside world. Conrad's speed transcended human limit, and while holding onto their rears, he pounded them with reckless abandon, driving them into relentless orgasms that only served to magnify the pleasure they all indulged in. Asterisk pa. Asterisk asterisk pa. Asterisk asterisk pa. Asterisk asterisk pa. Star. Meanwhile, in the outside, the citizens were lost in drunken orgies, thoroughly celebrating the profane prince's wedding night. Conrad's burning rods tensed, demanding release, and he slammed them deep into his partners, filling them to the brim with his spunk. But even then, he didn't stop, rolling on his back to force Yvonne onto the bed, his hands locking hers while he aligned himself with her serpentine tail's slits and thrust both his rods inside. Oh, ooh. With her eyes widening in disbelief, she released the loudest groan of the night, a startling groan that barreled against the walls and would have alarmed the imperial palace if the nuptial chamber's walls weren't soundproof. Unfazed, Conrad locked her lips against his, muffling her moans, and pounded his rod into her snatch in a new round of hammering. At that time, with cum dripping from their cunts, Verena and Elle stood up to caress every corner of his available body parts and press him fasted into Yvonne by cupping and pushing his ass checks. For 2 hours, the infernal mating carried on, giving the 4 younger consorts enough time to rise from their sex-induced torpor and surround Conrad from all sides, carry on with the impromptu orgy throughout the night. After their umpteenth orgasm, Conrad believed one night wasn't enough and carried them all into the Tower of Rebirth's highest floor, the concealed paradise, to expand the night. 7 hours became months of unending cultivation orgy, at the end of which the 6 consorts lied exhausted on a massive bed. Within the tower, time flew 36 folds faster. But the bed was like the time tornadoes, making it go another 10 folds faster. Therefore, they'd orgied for more than 100 days. Even their Devi and Demoness bodies couldn't endure such mating, and in that instant, they couldn't even move their legs. Because the bed automatically absorbed and dispersed fluids, their sweaty naked bodies and the cum oozing from their orifices were the only reminders of the grand orgy. Meanwhile, Verena and Elle saw their cultivations rise to half-step into the fate-wrestling saint rank. Initially, They should have stopped there until they gained their first insights into fate. However, Else had already gleaned some insight and therefore could break through to the fate wrestling rank as soon as she recovered. Gaining insight into fate and tribulations was no simple matter that without resources could take decades even for the gifted. Therefore, Conrad set aside false tribulation and fate-gazing pills for them to refine. On the contrary, because of his tribulation within the seventh floor, he wouldn't meet any bottleneck until star connection. Alas, because of his supreme Tao, his holy force requirements were far beyond that of anyone else. At the same time, his World Devourer bloodline further expanded the requirement, thus making it so large that after more than 3 months of dual cultivation, Conrad was only half-step into the profound saint rank. No more drinking. It really doesn't do me any good. Yvonne pledged as she lied beside Conrad, and all others were forced to agree. All except, nonsense. We've been drinking buddies for far too long to stop now. Let's go for another round. Conrad, of course. Go away. Seeing that none of his consorts possessed the strength to entertain him further, a dejected Conrad descended to the tower's lower floors to orgy with his consorts and female legionaries across several weeks. His cultivation then reached the early stage of the profound saint rank. Following the nuptial orgies, Conrad returned to the outside world, donning his imperial robe and crown to hold his first court session, while his consorts remained within the tower to carry on with their cultivation. Greetings, Your August Majesty. The officials knelt upon his entrance. Conrad waved his hand, motioning for them to rise. But as they did, and he took his place on the throne, enjoying the veneration of billions, little did he know that in the coming years, the ancient crystal world would be barreled by horrendous waves of turbulences. Turbulences that would spare none, the profane prince included. Chapter 287, Peaceful Decade. With the beginning of the profane prince's reign, the world soon fell into a deathly silence. And how could it not? With the disastrous defeat they suffered, the barbarian khans and chieftains all lost a tremendous amount of power, forcing them to restructure their domains and reassign resources to the training of new forces. Meanwhile, within the Celestial Church, Anatole gathered all the church's merit reserves to prepare the grand summoning ritual that would allow him to bring higher realm Devis onto the mortal world. At the same time, to make up for their merit loss, under Guliston's lead, the Circa-ruled infernal cult kidnapped 500 million of the most devout barbarian citizens and offered them in sacrifice to the Eastern King of Hell, the Lord of Blood, Asherah. Then, they captured another 500 million, and this time offered them to the Western King of Hell, the Lord of Souls, Urzel. In exchange for those 1 billion lives, Asherah and Urzel bestowed upon them several boons that allowed them to make up for their losses. Although those 1 billion only represented about 1/50th of the barbarian continent's overall population, all citizens were in fear, and the faith suffered a non-negligible blow. In fact, due to that move, millions of commoners abandoned the barbarian continent to flock the holy continent's border towns, seeking shelter in the cradle of the profane prince. They were all accepted, but soon, the barbarian khans intervened to stop that trend in the swiftest way possible: slaughter. Those that abandoned their tribes, towns, and cities were considered renegades and gruesomely executed by the royal clan's remaining semi-saint and saint-level experts. Soon, all large-scale moves stopped. The infernal cult and celestial church then closed their doors to carry on with their silent preparations. Thus, the cloak of silence descended on all that lied beyond the anti-divine screen. But in the Holy Continent, it was another story. The plague was gone. The war, over. Peace returned, and abundance was filling the land. True to his words, Conrad restructured the Holy Continent in 300 provinces, each containing 4 or 5 prefectures. The prefectures were then subdivided in 10 to 15 counties, and the counties in cities or towns. Conrad abolished taxes for 3 years, giving the commoners their much-needed respite. All citizens were then urged to pick their chosen castes and tested to see whether they fit the requirements or not. As expected, the merchant and farmer castes obtained the largest influx of members. Then came the craftsmen, the gentry, the warriors, and finally, the priesthood. The ranks were also relatively the same, the only difference being that the merchants ranked above the craftsmen. Using his personal wealth that far outpaced the state treasuries, Conrad began a new round of projects, including charities for orphans, the most promising of which would receive secret training from the faith. At least one talent assessing center, healing, and alchemy house stood within each towns and cities. On top of that, in the capital, hundreds of cultivation houses were erected to train the gifted. Due to their critical position in the enhancement of the state's cultivation power, alchemists, formation masters, and refiners saw their status increase by leaps and bounds. Of course, all key positions were filled with individuals having consumed phantasm orchids. With a hard limit of 1,000 orchid per day for his main body and avatars, Conrad was soon faced with the challenge of enslaving the entire administration. To make up for that, and out of personal greed, he ordered a mass recruitment of 5,000 outstanding beauties throughout the Holy Continent. Once the order spread, beauties flocked the capital from all sides. Meanwhile, Conrad's servants stretched across the continent to discover beauties where they hid. Marital status was wholly irrelevant, only their looks mattered. From those billions of women, 5,000 were picked to serve the august Jade Emperor as concubines. And after betting them all, Conrad obtained 5,000 new harem avatars which worked alongside him to produce more orchids. Soon, he didn't have much to do, and could delegate official matters to his avatars and trusted subordinates while focusing on leisure, cultivation, and dual cultivation from within the Tower of Rebirth, which he renamed as the Empyrean Tower. Regardless of caste, background, and status, all citizens were required to pay their respect to the Empyrean Tower 3 times a day. In less than 3 years, the Jade Dynasty's administration reached an unprecedented level of autonomy and could run itself without the true body's involvement. Even the vast majority of avatars were free to return to their EXP grinding tasks. EXP that across that decade rose to trillions. Trillions Conrad naturally put to great use. The 8th level of the main quest was completed, bringing alongside it a new round of rewards. And thus, 10 years passed. Now, the Jade Dynasty's state army numbered 100 million in total, among which were 200,000 saints and 800,000 semi-saints that comprised the elite forces. Those below the semi-holy rank had no place in the state's elite forces and either served in the army bases, the reserve, the border, or as patrol officers. Naturally, this didn't account for the 8,000-man strong legion that occupied the tower's first floor. Following those 10 years, even the weakest of the Restoration Beast had reached the 9th level. More than 5,000 level 9 Restoration Beasts that could break through to the next level at any time. As for the last 3,000, all became Infernal Knights with battle power equal to sages. However, the problems then began. Starting with the Infernal Knight rank, they were no longer demonic beasts but fiends. Each awoke an infernal armament physique. And with the restoration complete, their cultivation system underwent drastic changes, and they now needed to comprehend many mysteries to advance further. Of course, with the godblood they'd been refining, their innate talent was outstanding, and all still made rapid progress. Infernal Knights were divided into 4 ranks, each matching a divine rank. Knight Guards, Knight Commanders, Knight Generals, Paramount Knights. Of Conrad's 3,000 Infernal Knights, 2,000 became Knight Guards, 800 became Knight Commanders, 200 turned into Knight Generals, and 4 became Paramount Knights. Among those last 200s, 50 were already quasi-Paramount Knights, missing only a step to break through. Of course, besides massive resources, this was also due to the tower's time increase and emphasis Conrad put on training them. Now, throughout the ancient crystal world, celestial church or infernal cult, Conrad feared neither. Once his legion was unleashed, they couldn't withstand the assault. After all, the celestial church only possessed 36 divine rank elders. As for the infernal cult, due to the Circers, they had more. However, it was still less than 50. Even their combined forces would crumble in one charge. The only variable now was the merit steal. And according to his celestial church spies, Anatole was on the verge of completing his summoning ritual, an open heaven's gate for the arrival of divine ascension Brahmas, Maras, and Ravmalax. Chapter 288 to the Rancid Turtles and Celestial Harlots. Hearing that news, Conrad's lips curled into a smile, and he waved his hand, summoning Kron. Master! Kron knelt in greetings. Following these 10 years, his cultivation had soared alongside Conrad's, and his battle power reached dreadful heights. Now, throughout the ancient crystal world, Conrad's forces aside, those able to contend with him could be counted were few and far between. The Celestial Church is eager to renew the hostilities with higher realm backups. While the thought of battling those Devis is entertaining, we can't allow them to give us more trouble than we need. Take 300 Knight Commanders, 60 Knight Generals, and 10 Quasi-Paramount Knight to obliterate the Celestial Church. Keep both men and women alive. I need their souls. Conrad ordered from within the Jade Palace's imperial study, and immediately, Kron clasped his hands and bowed in agreement before shooting toward the Empyrean Tower to mobilize the troops. Unlike most of his consorts, Conrad didn't spend more than 68 years within the tower. The reason was simple. He met a bottleneck time alone couldn't solve. Having reached the peak of the cross-tribulation saint rank, Conrad was ready to break through star connection. With his resources, a breakthrough shouldn't have been a problematic matter. However, star connection was a sensitive stage with massive impact on cultivation post-godhood. If he didn't tread carefully, there was a specific god rank he would not be able to surpass. In star connection, cultivator connected themselves to a distant star within the 3 realms and drew power from it. In star manifestation, they summoned a portion of the star, and in star fusion, they permanently fused with said portion. There were low, mid, and high-grade stars, each bestowing more power onto the cultivator. However, this was an erroneous path. The stars existed beyond the cultivator, either naturally formed or created by another god. In the former case, it was just a cultivation issue, but in the later, dreadful hidden dangers lied. Whoever fused with a part of a god's star was, unbeknown to them, bound to that god. Said god could deprive them of their star force at any time. Meanwhile, if they chose a naturally formed star on the one hand, they automatically failed to comprehend a critical cultivation mystery, and on the other hand, they couldn't connect to more than one star, thus crippling future achievements. Of course, most people could never even glimpse at the concerned god rank. Therefore, the vast majority ignored that issue. But for Conrad, who pursued supremacy, it was of vital importance. The only way ahead was to create his own illusory stars, a feat requiring extreme talent and soul power. Having set aside the majority of his holy and divine grade soul expansion pills for his consorts, Conrad could only count on the infernal soul-devouring art to snatch more soul power. After all, although he possessed more than enough soul power to condense illusory stars to achieve the unparalleled level he pursued, it was far from enough. Still, they didn't disappoint him. Yvonne condensed 36 illusory stars, Else 32, and Verena 28. The rest varied between 20 and 28. Even Malcolm only had 36 stars upon birth. This result was more than satisfying. Talking about Malcolm, Conrad somewhat envied him and those primogens who were all born deities with all the previous cultivation steps fulfilled by hell or heaven's will. The closer they were to their realm will's origin, the more boons they received at birth. Astounding, really. With a step, he vanished, reappearing within the tower's 3rd floor where Zamira currently sat crossed-legged in meditation. As soon as he appeared, her eyes opened and landed on him, and she stood to greet him. Your Majesty, Zamira bowed in greetings. With Conrad being both her son-in-law and master, their relationship had always been a pleasant but peculiar one. Of course, time and delight made all those peculiarities irrelevant. After more than 3 centuries of secluded cultivation, like most of the leading consorts, Zamira now stood at the star-fusing saint rank. But throughout this time, neither she nor Conrad forgot the old commitment. How are you getting accustomed to your Titan bloodline? Conrad inquired with a gentle smile. After some deliberation, he changed Zamira's bloodline to Titan for the sake of preserving her human origins. Though the cost wasn't negligible, it was a gesture he found necessary. I must admit it suits me more than the demonic one. She replied with a similar smile. Conrad nodded and stepped toward her. Throughout those centuries of cultivation, Zamira's beauty and natural aura had only been heightened. Although she didn't possess a temptation-related lineage, her mere presence was more than enough to captivate the average man. I'm here to give you good news. It will soon be time for us to step into the barbarian continent and restore your tribe. But as you know, only the women remain, with some of them possessing a few male descendants. Although seizing land and territory is a simple matter, as far as true restoration is concerned, I'm afraid that's a bit lacking. Conrad explained while stretching his right hand toward her chin and seizing it between his thumb and index. That's a simple matter. We can just capture some young males with decent bloodlines for the women to mate with. In any case, the Borkson tribe was always a matriarchy. Zamira replied, her smile unchanged. Although she stood tall at 1.8 meters, Conrad was more than 10 centimeters taller with an imposing, muscular build that formed a perfect contrast with her slender yet voluptuous form. His left arm wrapped around her waist, brushing her perky but as it went, and pulling her closer toward him. She didn't evade, and her cantaloupe-sized breasts collided with his broad chest, forcing her cleavage and the upper half of her breasts out of her dress collar. How naughty. Excellent mindset. Then it's decided. Conrad whispered with his lips bordering Zamira's. Why so suddenly? After touring the Holy Continent incognito with Jasmine, I'm wondering how the barbarian continent is faring. Hearing this, Zamira arched her eyebrows. Truth? No, I came to plow you. How fast we go will depend on how well you perform today. He straightforwardly replied while lowering his palms on her supple butt cheeks and coping a feel. Well, I can only try my hardest to ensure we depart in the shortest of times. Zamira replied before taking Conrad's lips into hers. Meanwhile, Kron gathered the legionaries and led them toward the Celestial Church's floating headquarters. To the rancid turtles and celestial harlots, this is an official declaration of impending thrashing. As per His August Majesty's will, our forces have arrived to clean your wretched house. Kron roared with his arms crossed beneath his back. Chapter 289 Celestial Church vs. Infernal Battalion. The roar thundered within the entirety of the Celestial Church, hacking at the eardrums of the non-sages and causing blood to trickle down their earlobes. Alongside the 36 celestial elders, Anatole rose in shock and spread his divine sense toward the outside. There, the most formidable gathering he'd ever witnessed in tens of thousands of years of existence hovered. Infernal Knights, 300 Knight Commanders, 60 Knight Generals, 10 Quasi-Paramount Knights. Tarnation. Anatole muttered in a stupor. Due to the Restoration Path's unique characteristics, Infernal Knights were usually stronger than their average counterparts at the same level. Worse, those standing before him boasted auras that stood leagues above the average Infernal Knight, as if they'd been bathing in rivers of godblood across centuries. Faced with such a startling demonic foe, Anatole was forced to admit that even if he deployed the headquarters' full strength, the Celestial Church's victory odds were shallow, to say the least. Where did such mastodons suddenly come from? Activate the headquarters' defensive formations, Anatole ordered, and immediately, the Celestial Protectors took position across the various corners of the Celestial Church to trigger the defensive formations. At the same time, Anatole took command of the central formation. Then, with the elders by his side, shot toward the invaders. The Celestial Church's headquarters was a massive floating domain stretching across tens of thousands of miles, with the several houses each occupying an area and forming a circle around the central cathedral where all turned into church disciples. Besides the formations, a perpetual barrier surrounded the domain, preventing a direct assault. But today, feeling the horrifying demonic energies assailing their headquarters, from disciples to elders, none trusted in the safety of the barrier. In dozens of light beams, Anatole and the celestial elders dropped before the barrier's edge, their eyes locking on the hundreds of infernal knights that stood on the outside. Although they'd already sensed the force beforehand, Witnessing it at such close proximity filled their hearts with a greater sense of gravity. When did such a force appear, and how did we offend them? Even the hidden forest can't possibly conceal that many experts, the great elder exclaimed, speaking the words that rang within his peers' mind and filled their hearts with incomprehension. The timing is questionable. When we're at the critical juncture of completing the summoning ritual, when Heaven's Gate is about to open and bring forth our backups, they suddenly appear. No, I'm afraid we've been backstabbed. One of our owns must have leaked the situation. Anatole analyzed while his eyes locked on the man leading this dreadful battalion. As for where they hail from, look at their leader. Isn't that obvious? When the elders heard this, their eyes followed Anatole's and locked on the leading man. It was a handsome and suave-looking man in his late 20s with a finely trimmed circle beard. Though his appearance didn't echo with anyone they knew, seeing the short, slicked-back jade hairs, the golden eyes and red prism mark on the man's forehead, the elders were immediately reminded of the incarnation of their nightmares. The Profane Prince and now August Jade Emperor, Conrad. Their eyes widened in disbelief. He can't possibly be one of his relatives, right? The great elder stammered, attempting to reassure himself, but Anatole shook his head. Peak stage cross-tribulation Saint cultivation base, but the pressure and intensity don't lose out to the average divine blood rank expert. This is the ancient crystal world. Besides the people of that anomaly, who could possibly showcase such monstrous abilities? Among those fiends, he's by far not the strongest. And yet, they stand behind him in an orderly fashion, revealing his status as their leader. You tell me, where else can we find such a peculiar sight? Anatole sighed, realizing his oversight. Across those 10 years, he'd dispatched several low-level disciples to sneak into the Jade Dynasty and check its development. And though startled by its meteoric rise and the legions of saints it bred, after 10 years, the known top experts were still at the saint level. Therefore, for the Celestial Church's leaders, Conrad was the only threat, the sole variable. Never did they expect that in the shadows, an even more dreadful force lied. And now, Anatole didn't doubt that even before the war a decade ago, Conrad had been training this force, only waiting to accumulate enough strength before unleashing it on the world. But even then, he wasn't deterred. In open warfare, we can only get slaughtered. But this is the Celestial Church's headquarters. Sieging it, you are asking for destruction. Anatole roared back, and alongside the elders, stretched out his hands. Gold, blue, gray, and magenta light pillars rose from various corners of the Celestial Church to pierce the sky. The light pillars merged, and from the sky descended a white light armored giant, tall of 1,000 meters. Light strands rose from the middle of the elders and Anatole's forehead to connect them to the armored giant. The giant raised his hands. In the right, a gigantic sword appeared, and around the left, a white shield formed. At the same time, a bow and quiver appeared on the giant's back. Within that giant, Anatole and his elders were united in one mind, ready to meet the invader with the full might of the headquarters. And the startling pressure they released surpassed a divine ascension expert such as Birkin. But before this force, Kron sneered. Remember, our Lord wants them alive, he proclaimed, and the hundreds of smiling infernal knights nodded in approval. Yes, Legion Commander, they replied in tandem, then stretched out their hands, summoning their various infernal armaments. Their battle power rose to a new level. At the same time, Kron waved his hand, summoning a silver chakram from which dozens of silver light chains emerged and connected to the battalion. Silver flames burst from their forms, not only heightening their battle power, but making it overlap in a mightier whole. The chakram was a sublime formation tool Conrad exchanged from the system. As the name implied, it was embedded with a formation that could be triggered at will as long as enough divine power was provided. And seeing their foes' already dreadful strength rise to new heights, the elders despaired. Still, Anatole didn't flounder. He only wanted one thing: time. As long as they could hold out until the gate opened, the Celestial Church would be the final winner. And indeed, As the opposing forces readied to meet in battle, a loud grating sound echoed from Heaven's Gate, announcing the beginning of its opening to the celestial realm and the impending arrival of the promised Devis. Chapter 290 Unyielding Spyri. Although the merit steal allowed them to summon who they could afford to, it was both a lengthy and uncertain process. Lengthy because the summoning wasn't automatic, its speed depending on the number of sacrifices provided. Uncertain because the summoning was by itself the reward. Nothing guaranteed that whoever was summoned would fulfill the summoner's wishes. On the contrary, if summoned without warning, higher realm Devis and demons were very likely to obliterate the summoners. For that reason, using a substantial amount of merit, Anatole first spent several years to establish a dialogue with his chosen houses and negotiate their support. Only after receiving their agreement did he start the ritual. But following the first confrontation, even he was starting to doubt their ability to endure until the reinforcements' arrivals. Led by Kron and the 10 quasi-paramount knights, as if bound by one mind, the infernal battalion battered the giant from left to right, not leaving it any room for a proper counterattack. The collision between the two forces rent the atmosphere, forming dozens of space cracks all around, and threatening to rip out a space vortex to swallow them all. The quasi-paramount knights released a succession of irresistible strikes on the celestial giant, sending it flying backward, and causing Anatole and his elders to spurt large mouthfuls of blood. At this rate, to say nothing of the 45 minutes they needed, they wouldn't even be able to endure 5. An abysmal gap stood between the two forces, and for the first time in tens of thousands of years, Anatole didn't doubt that no road to victory lied ahead. And if even he thought this way, there was no need to mention the elders. Hateful, he cursed while struggling to maintain balance. Since an offensive stance could yield no result, Anatole led the celestial giant back into the barrier, using it as a nucleus to power the defensive formation and enhance the barrier's resilience. Seeing this, Kron shook his head. Quasi-paramount knights and knight generals, combine your laws in one strike. Knight commanders, support them with the full depth of your infernal energies. Kron ordered. The laws he mentioned were nothing more than 7th circle spells, or divine laws as most usually referred to them, be it fire, water, nature, light, or any other. Each attribute only had one 7th circle spell called the law. It didn't exist on any parchment or grimoire, but stemmed from the spellcaster's understanding of the attribute. By comprehending at least 10% of the attribute's underlying principles, one could unleash its law and release it under any chosen form. Fire laws, lightning laws, darkness and blood laws rose into the sky alongside dozens of magical circles. Guided by Kron's chakram and the infernal night cooperation, those incompatible laws overlapped in an organic whole, becoming a transcendent force that threatened to obliterate all that stood in its way. Witnessing this amalgam of laws empowered by large reserves of infernal forces, the church elders were scared witless. And feeling their floundering hearts, Kron decided to strike. Our Lord isn't asking for your lives. He merely requests your surrender. As long as you abandon this foolish resistance, all will be spared. But if you persist in seeking damnation, you can't blame us for your gruesome fate. Kron exclaimed. His words filled the elders with complicated thoughts. Among them, the sun spirits were the most passionate and less practical. Paragon, dream, and moon spirits were, in general, clear-headed individuals that wouldn't court destruction for a last show of splendor. Faced with an opportunity to survive, why would they seek death? And as their hesitation rose, the celestial giant weakened. Sensing this, Kron sneered while Anatole despaired. Perhaps before the blow descended, those death-dreading wastes would turn coat and waste all previous efforts. Everyone don't be confused, Anatole began. But before he could finish his words, the amalgam of laws turned into a multicolor scythe that descended upon them all. As it did, it tore a large space gash that would have certainly swallowed any non-sage that stood in the vicinity. The barrier collapsed, and seeing death approach at such a rapid pace, the paragon, Dream, and Moon's spirit elders all chose the road to survival and broke their connection to the celestial giant, thus leaving the sun spirits alone to shoulder the blow. "We surrender, we surrender," they proclaimed at such a rapid pace that Kron wondered if their buttocks weren't being roasted by a hidden fire. "Traitorous scum," Anatole spat, but before he could make a move, the scythe struck the celestial giant, splitting it into two halves that soon vanished in light particles. With the giant's collapse, the Worth elders all experienced massive backlash and flew backward with blood erupting from all their orifices. And seeing the pathetic display of this so-called supreme force, Kron sighed. How unsightly! To think that this motley crew even dares look down on the secular world. Pathetic. Feeding Master's soul is their only worth. Begin the collection, Kron ordered. With the barrier broken and the opposition crushed, the infernal battalion faced no resistance. First, they sealed the cultivation bases of the surrendering elders and trapped them in space treasures. And witnessing this, Anatole knew he only had one choice left. "Worth elders, with me. Burn your life force and fly toward the Merit Steel," he ordered in a mental message. And by the time Kron's battalion trapped the 27 surrendering elders, Anatole and the remaining 9 had already appeared before the Merit Steel. There, his wife, who oversaw the ritual, awaited. And as soon as their eyes met, they didn't need a word to understand the choice and resolve in one another's eyes. Anatole then turned toward his house's elders. "Are you willing to degenerate into the dogs of that decadent beast?" he directly asked. "A gentleman can be killed but cannot be humiliated. Although we've fallen into this world, our ancestors hailed from the celestial realm. With our illustrious ancestry, how could we be willing to surrender to this barbaric creature? We are not willing," they replied in a heartbeat, pulling an approving nod from Anatole. "Then you know what to do." Understanding the meaning of Anatole's words, together, the Worth elders stood before the towering Merit Steel and held one another's hand. Anatole and his wife stood before them and did the same. "Lord Surya, you heard my people's will. Through this steel, we offer you our lives and souls, beseech you to complete the summoning, and not let your staunch servant's sacrifice be in vain," Anatole proclaimed before turning toward his wife to exchange that one last loving glance. "My lady, it was my pleasure to be your husband. My only regret is that we shan't have another life to be a couple again. Husband, even if our souls scatter, our ashes and dust shall be bound for eternity," she replied with a radiant smile. And hearing this, Anatole felt all weights scattering from his heart and shoulders. Then, alongside his wife and the Worth elders, he self-destructed. Dazzling, golden light erupted from their bodies as they burst in an earth-shaking explosion. Left unchecked, such an eruption of divine power should have wiped off everything across hundreds of thousands of miles into nothingness. However, the Merit Steel absorbed it all, preventing the tiniest bit of noise from spreading to the outside. And feeling the presence of all those experts vanishing out of the blue, Kron's face contorted into a frown. Not good, and indeed, Heaven's Gate's slow opening stopped, and as if kicked by a hidden force, the gate flew open, releasing a blinding light vortex that heralded the arrival of the celestial realm's reinforcement. Feeling the dreadful auras that spread from the gates, Kron didn't hesitate. "Retreat," he ordered, and in tandem, the knight commanders that were collecting the Celestial Church's remnant stopped dead in their tracks. The quasi-paramount knights that were shooting toward the Worth elders also stopped and backpedaled. And at their fastest pace, all rushed back toward the anti-divine screen. By the time they vanished, a golden ray was spreading toward the spot they previously occupied. And had they remained to shoulder it, the casualties would have been difficult to estimate. What a pity. Oh well, at the very least, this might not be a total annoyance. A voice echoed, bringing alongside it hundreds of figures that emerged from the gate to officially step on the ancient crystal world. Chapter 291, Valkyrie Armors. Meanwhile, Trouble's supple lips pushed onto the Jade Dynasty. As soon as Kron left for the Celestial Church, from deep within the barbarian continent's hidden forest, a commotion arose. Uwin, Awurin, Awuyuin. The world tree's wailing sound intensified, and with it, so did the gray mist swirling around its gargantuan form. From the ground, the continual rumbling sounds heightened, bringing alongside them a plethora of cracks from which two gray cocoons rose. In an eruption of gray light, the cocoons broke, releasing 5 meters tall young men with gruff, stocky features. But though their ordinary faces, eyes, and hair colors gave no insight into their lineages, those tiny bodies of theirs rippled with formidable destructive strength that made them impossible to ignore. In silence, they stepped forward, vanishing to reappear before the holy continent's anti-divine screen. They ignored it, instead locking their eyes on the tower high in heaven's vault. According to the elders, this tower is the result of a merge between Marduk and Isilia's god artifacts. Its rank is fairly high, and its mysteries profound. If we can, we should bring it back. The left one stated in a bland tone. Do not forget that our primary task is to probe the depth of this rising force. Everything else is secondary. The right one replied in a similarly bland tone. His companion merely nodded, and the two then stepped forward, bypassing the anti-divine screen to land above the capital. Clearly, their cultivation was below the divine rank. As soon as they arrived, they swept the imperial palace with their small black eyes, then directly punched out. Each of those jabs released a formless pressure that barreled into the imperial palace, threatening to obliterate it. Boom. But before the formless force could collide with it, it met an invisible screen that blocked its onslaught in a resounding force explosion that raised a vast array of dust. Undisturbed, the two looked beyond the dust clouds to spot the source of this resistance. The figure of a freckled, auburn-haired young maiden clad in a fancy silver armor appeared above the imperial palace, her presence blocking any rogue assault. For pairs of wings stretched from the back of the silver armor and lightly flapped as if animated by a will of their own. The maiden's cold, hazel eyes locked onto the two dwarf men whose indifferent eyes slightly shimmered following her appearance. Impressive, the right dwarf appraised. Before emerging from beneath the world tree, they'd received orders to evaluate the current state of the holy continent and test the depth of the new dynasty. However, as they came, they didn't expect much. After all, before their clan's current strength, the ancient crystal world's experts were nothing more than ants. But in that one move, that freckled maiden revealed a shocking foundation and battle power that didn't lose out to their house's top talents. Perhaps there is more to this place than meets the eyes. Z's, alone or together? Asked the left dwarf. She's just at the early stage of the star-fusing saint rank while the both of us are at the peak. Of course, we must gang up on her. Z's replied, and in the instant the words left his lips, his impassible visage contorted into a disturbingly crazed look that echoed his rising thirst for slaughter. Well said, girl. Etch our names into your soul. Z's and Vialk of the House of Slyvas. Vialk declared, and alongside his partner, clenched his fist. Grr. Though no supernatural display surrounded them, the already suffocating pressure surrounding them rose to a new level while grumbling sound permeated the air. And as her hazel gaze swept them, Astarte had the misconception that in those tiny hands of there lied the strength to split mountains and rivers. But of course, she was undeterred. What truly startled her was the information she gained from her origin site, an intel revealing a lineage she knew nothing of. Z's and Vialk stepped forward, vanishing to reappear before Astarte at a speed that eclipsed that of the average divine seed expert. Again, they threw simple punches, but this time, their might increased several folds, and within those knuckles lied a multitude of concealed force. Space cracks formed around their fists as they slammed into Astarte. And before that assault able to shred the average divine seed expert into pieces, Astarte did only one thing. Nothing. Boom. In a resounding boom, the punches slammed onto Astarte's breastplate, but instead of releasing a berserk wave of energy, instead of sending her flying backward or tearing her to shred, any strength within the punches was absorbed by the silver armor she wore. Since you had the courtesy of introducing yourselves, allow me to do the same. Ranked 4th among the Profane Prince's 5,000 Valkyries. Astarte, of the House of Conrad. She declared while silver light erupted from her armor and released a massive energy wave that sent the two flying backward. Their eyes widened in disbelief. What kind of armor is this? Meanwhile, within the Empyrean Tower, Conrad lied on a floating cloud, with Zamira slamming her perky but on his rod while squealing in delight. Ah! She moaned with her hands clenching his chest and her nails digging into his nigh indestructible flesh. At the same time, Conrad groped her breasts and tugged on her erect nipples which seemed eager to feel his touch. But as the squelching sounds formed by the mixture between Conrad's meat rod and Zamira's gripping snatch echoed, in a twister of light, a figure appeared. It was a slender, pale-skinned, armored beauty with blood-red eyes. As soon as she appeared, she dropped on her knees and bowed toward Conrad. Your August Majesty, 2 unknown individuals have appeared within the capital and directly launched an assault on the imperial palace. Their cultivation is at the peak of the star-fusing saint rank, but they possess at least 2 mastered, low-grade divine physiques with formidable bloodlines and foundation. Although Lady Astarte is currently engaging them, to avoid variables, I request the permission to capture and interrogate those unruly peons. The red-eyed beauty declared as if oblivious to the scene occurring beforehand. Naturally, as a resident of the Empyrean Palace, she had been routinely exposed to such scenes. In fact, she'd been at the receiving end of Conrad's rod more than once. As one of my 4 paramount knights and a member of the Hidden Moon Pavilion, your primary duties are to serve as the Jade Dynasty's concealed strength and stand within your Emperor's shadow. Someone of your level shouldn't appear before the real enemies reveal themselves. As for those 2, with the 4-winged Valkyrie armor empowering her, I believe they can't take more than 20 moves of my Astarte. Conrad replied while holding onto Zamira's waist and slamming her faster on his rod, which tensed with an impending orgasm. The Valkyrie armors weren't Conrad's creations, but rewards from the 8th level of the main quest. They were ranked according to color and wing number, with 6 grades in total. And while they were an infinite number of low-grade Valkyrie armors, those of the high grade had limited quotas. Quotas Conrad's ladies fought for in a same-level tournament he oversaw. Chapter 292 Valkyrie Judgment. Unsurprisingly, Yvonne defeated all and claimed first place, while Els snatched the second spot and Verena third. But when all expected Ileana, Jasmine, Freya, Zamira, and Nils to contend for the following positions, Astarte defeated them all, thus promoting herself to the 4th place. Unlike the others, Astarte spent a substantial amount of time disguised as a commoner in the barbarian continent, with her cultivation sealed while she battled numbers of barbarian dangers. Thanks to those thousands of intense, life and death battles, her battle will had risen to a sky-high level. Meanwhile, following Conrad's ascension as Nephilim and a round of modifications, Astarte's bloodline had experienced startling changes. From fiend, she turned into an unprecedented species that perfectly combined spirit, fiend, and human blood. Although the result wasn't anywhere near as dreadful as Conrad's World Devourer bloodline, it still was a force to be reckoned with. In fact, were it not because at the time, Verena's cultivation of Seer's vision had already reached the 2nd layer, Astarte might have snatched the 3rd place. For those reasons, Conrad felt the battle without suspense and focused on plowing Zamira above him. The silver light swirling around Astarte coalesced into a long silver broadsword which she grabbed in her left hand. In the right, white light flared, turning into a marble-white broadsword that landed in her right hand. Holding those 2 massive weapons meant for two-handed wielding, Astarte stepped forward, vanished, and appeared behind her assailants, driving her swords through their backs in backward thrusts. Clang! The move glided across their skin which seemed 1,000 times stronger than steel. In a flash, they swirled into the air, stabilizing themselves above. But as they lowered their gaze back onto Astarte, they felt a tingling sensation where her swords hit. Following a brief examination, Ziz and Vile were shocked to see that thin lines remained where Astarte's swords passed. How can this be? We're zenith ants. How can the casual sword stroke of a non-sage possibly wound us? It seems more than one freak hides in this Jade dynasty. With our strength alone, a solid probe is impossible. We must alert the elders and have them break the anti-divine screen. Ziz and Vile said in turn and prepared to escape. But before they could make another move, they felt themselves suppressed within the air, unable to advance further. Again, Astarte was between them, hurling her swords at their necks. Damnable! Do you really think we fear you? Innate skill. Zenith? The two roared in tandem, and instantaneously, the pressure emanating from their bodies skyrocketed. Heaven and earth trembled, and Astarte's swords bounced against invisible walls that propelled her backward. By the time she stopped her descent, the two's appearances were undergoing drastic changes, going from tiny humans to greenish creatures whose features contorted in an abominable transformation. Massive demonic energies erupted from their form, revealing the true nature of their lineage. And though their sizes remained at 1.5 meters, they now turned into two bipedal dark green ants with scissor-like hands and a pair of antennae above their heads. Hee girl, to force us zenith ants to unleash our true forms is the glory of your lifetime. You can die in peace. Ziz and Vilk declared, then flew at Astarte in green meteors. In tandem, they slammed their scissor-like hands on either side of her neck, aiming to behead her in one stroke. Clang! The scissor hands crashed against Astarte's swords, and while deflecting the blows, she let the full might of her cultivation, bloodline, and physiques erupt alongside her Valkyrie armor's strength. Silver lightning burst from her form, while white star force and swirled around her form. The illusory image of 28 stars appeared above her head, morphing into a miniature starry sky of its own. Astarte whirled on 360 degrees. White star force and silver lightning fused with her swords as they hacked at Ziz and Vilk's sides, */ star. A piercing, tearing sound echoed, and green blood erupted from their sides to splatter Astarte. But before it could stain her, her silver lightning turned it into nothingness. Ziz and Vilk tumbled onto the ground, and Astarte connected the pommels of her swords, combining them into a double-edged weapon. With a graceful spin, she turned toward them, looking at them with glaring indifference. Zenith ants? Never heard of you. I only know that you trespassed in the Jade capital and attempted to damage my beloved master's imperial palace. Those are cardinal sins for which you must answer with your lives. Astarte declared, and as she spoke, her indifferent eyes shone with soaring killing intent. Wrath of the sun and moon. Above Astarte's left shoulder, a dazzling white sun appeared, while above the right, a moon of the same color hovered. She whirled her double-edged weapon, causing the sun and moon to rise and dance above her forehead, their spiraling motions releasing a massive shroud of heavenly forces that erupted in a stellar strike, combining the strength of the sun and moon. The blinding beam descended on the two zenith ants, and neither doubted that should they fail to resist it, destruction awaited. Therefore, they chose to go all out. Awaken and usher the eternal night. Nihility flail. Ziz and Vilk roared, and in an eruption of demonic, dark green light and soaring boulders, two jet black, 1.2 meters tall flails appeared and landed in their hands, which morphed to adjust to them. Those were their lineage weapons, the mark of their illustrious ancestry, and the root of their true might. And though it was broad daylight, as soon as those weapons appeared, the clear sky vanished, forcefully replaced by an impromptu night. Bang! The two slammed their flails onto the ground, releasing berserk demonic energies that spread throughout the land and caused gargantuan earth walls to rise before Astarte's strike. The two forces met in an earth-shaking explosion that sent Ziz and Vilk flying backward while Astarte only recoiled from a few steps. Since we're going all out, I might as well follow. Storm of the Sun and Moon, Valkyrie Judgment. Astarte bellowed while aiming the marble white edge of her weapon toward the two zenith ants that barely regained their footing. Her white sun and moon merged, then exploded in a thundering eruption of light that sent dozens of icy and flaming beams toward the two. Without hesitation, they hurled their lineage weapons at the incoming beams, resisting with all their might. And as they exhausted their last bits of strength, an even more dreadful force descended. Astarte's entire armor and weapon turned into pure silver lightning, and from the tip of her weapon erupted a 50 meters wide lightning beam that descended onto the exhausted pair. What a miscalculation! Vialk sighed before the lightning beam struck them both, charring them where they stood and depriving them of consciousness long before they could feel the pain it unleashed. Chapter 293 Hidden Moon Pavilion. Crushed by Astarte's Valkyrie Judgment, the two zenith ants collapsed onto the ground. Astarte made a grasping motion, pulling them toward her before shifting her gaze onto the Empyrean Tower where Conrad currently resided. "Master, I have captured the intruders and are bringing them to you," she alerted through a mental message. Conrad approved while finishing his session with Zamira. But before Astarte could fly toward the tower, Kron returned to the Jade Capital alongside his battalion. Astarte's eyes locked onto his, and seeing the urgency shining within, she could feel that his last trip didn't end in the wanted success. "Lady Astarte," Kron bowed, then, alongside his troops, vanished to reappear within the Empyrean Tower where Conrad was currently indulging in a carnal wine pool. The carnal wine pool was an invention of his, inspired by a famous earth tyrant. Like the name implied, wine replaced water, high-grade cultivation wine that snuck past the pores to refine the body and enhance energy reserves while the cultivator rested inside. 12 scantily clad concubines lied in the bath alongside him, tending to his body while he relaxed in their arms. "Your Majesty, why hasn't your true body been visiting the second floor as often as before? We can't dual cultivate as efficiently that way. Are you bored with us?" "Your Majesty, I've reached a bottleneck in my cultivation. Please help your servant break through." "Your Majesty, my breasts feel sore." "Your Majesty, I think my butt is losing firmness." "Your Majesty, Your Majesty, Your Majesty." As the dozen of honeyed sounds invaded Conrad's ears, in a twister of jade light, Kron appeared. "Master, please forgive my incompetence," he exclaimed while dropping into a kowtow. "Relate the events," Conrad ordered in a calm tone while stroking the cheeks of his concubines. At that time, Astarte appeared, bringing alongside her the two suppressed zenith ants. "As you ordered, I led a battalion against the Celestial Church and crushed them at a rapid pace. However, never did I expect that the Worth would rather die than compromise. Unlike the Moon, Dream, and Paragon Spirit Elders, led by Anatole, the Worth Elders all chose to offer themselves in sacrifice to the Merit Steel and expedite the opening of Heaven's Gate." Kron began while keeping his forehead plastered on the ground. "Now, the Celestial Realm Devis have arrived. I counted more than 300, none beneath the divine rank, and among their leaders, several auras standing at the peak of divine ascension appeared. Although I don't believe any Celestial Chosen was present, the leaders are definitely not too far from that level and are definitely godchildren. Celestial Chosen were to the Celestial Realm what infernal stars were to the Infernal Realm, the most outstanding youths beneath the age of 1,000. Individuals close to that level could indeed not be underestimated. There usually wasn't too great a gap among the various chosen and stars. Malcolm's era was the only exception. As for godchildren, the name spoke for itself. Ravmalak, Brahma, and Mara? Conrad inquired in the same level tone, and Kron immediately nodded. Yes, all of those Devis are either from the Ravmalak, Brahma, and Mar lineages. Hearing this, Conrad showed no reaction. "Rise. This doesn't stem from your oversight. Even I didn't expect that House Worth's determination was this profound. That Anatole managed to bring all his elders with him is, indeed, a surprise." Rarely have we met such unyielding spirits. A pity that I couldn't personally see them off," Conrad declared while standing up, and as he did, a start appeared to cover his shoulders with a bathrobe. Having received his pardon, Kron also stood up. Though, if they think such a gathering is enough to vanquish us, they're in for a terrible surprise. Hidden Moon Pavilion, gather. Conrad ordered, and instantaneously, 100 kneeling forms appeared before him. The quasi-paramount knights, and some of the knight generals Kron had brought with him stood between them. Except that this time, they all wore a black crystal armor with 4 pairs of black wings sprouting from its back. That armor was a special creation from Conrad, forged from the refinery cauldron by mixing formation tools, divine crystals, offensive and defensive divine artifacts, and a massive quantity of godblood. Currently, he only had 100 such armors which he used to form his secret guard out of his most outstanding knights. Those 100 armors were comparable to 4-winged Valkyrie armors. They were even slightly stronger. Your August Majesty, the Hidden Moon Pavilion stands ready to execute your orders. The 4 paramount knights leading the remaining armored knights declared with clasped hands. The enemy will soon arrive. First, take control of the Imperial Palace's defensive formations, and stand ready to activate them when we so need. Unless it is absolutely necessary, I don't want to reveal your existence, yet. Yes, Your Majesty, the Hidden Moon Pavilion's experts exclaimed, before vanishing from sight to execute Conrad's orders. Kron, release your captives. I will refine their souls and begin a large breakthrough. Yes, my liege. Kron obeyed and with a wave of his hand, summoned the 27 celestial elders who, at first, were startled to see themselves standing before such a licentious pool. But when their eyes locked on Conrad's golden hues, fright shone within. Greetings, your profane highness. We have come to surrender. From this moment on, our strength is yours to do with as you see fit. They stammered. Bad. You shouldn't look without my permission. Conrad stated with a smirk. The scenery changed and the group reappeared in another location of the Empyrean Tower. The elders were startled. Though, you misunderstand. Your strength is by itself negligible. It is your souls that hold my interest. Conrad explained, then stretched out his right hand, activating the infernal soul devouring. Wait, he said if we surrendered. They stuttered, alarmed by Conrad's words and the rising dark mist erupting from his form. He lied. To this day, do you still not know that my people's words cannot be trusted? Conrad inquired in an amused tone while his black mist stuck into the celestial elder's forehead and pulled out their souls. Des, pieceable. Conrad, die like a dog. Vile creature. Heaven and earth won't spare you. They roared in indignation, but to no avail. The black mist laced their souls and refined them where they stood, allowing Conrad to siphon every bit of their soul power. The elders' bodies then fell limp on the ground. Machem, delightful. Conrad relished in the meal while rubbing his hand over his stomach. His eyes then shifted toward Astarte and the unconscious captives floating beside her. Chapter 294. The reinforcements clean the house. Keep them for now. I must immediately start my breakthrough. Alert Else, Verena, and Yvonne of the current situation and have them prepare. Conrad instructed, and hearing this, Astarte bowed and vanished in a white haze. As for you, Kron, take command of the Legion and stand ready to assist the mistresses if need be. I believe more of those zenith ants will show themselves. Their true depth is hard to fathom. No negligence is allowed. Kron then took his leave, and only Conrad now remained. I didn't expect that zenith ants still remained within the ancient crystal world. Where could the nest possibly be? Conrad wondered. Having obtained a tremendous amount of knowledge from either the infernal souls or Selene, he knew very well what those creatures were. Those two were nothing more than average soldiers with unremarkable bloodlines. I'm as surprised as you are. According to common knowledge, The ancient crystal world's zenith ants were all killed by my father. But now it appears they found a road to survival. In the demonic hierarchy, they used to rank very high. This bodes no good for us. Celine replied. Indeed. Maybe it's time we use the world gate to ditch the ancient crystal world. Conrad jested. From completing the 7th level of the main quest, he obtained 2 items, the world and harem gates. With the world gate, he could travel to any mortal world without restrictions, while the harem gate allowed him to open a door to any harem ring wielder and either bring them to his side or reach theirs. Jasmine, Ileana, Nils, Freya, and Daphne were currently sightseeing in distant mortal worlds while laying down the foundation of their future invasions. As for the 8th level, besides the Valkyrie armors, he also obtained 2 startling items. Don't say it if you don't mean it. Celine rolled her eyes. Touché. Oh well, my turn. Conrad then sat cross-legged in meditation, ready to start his breakthrough. Meanwhile, within the celestial church, a crushing silence reigned. If the rapid series of events should have swept the church with sorrow and dread, the appearance of those higher reinforcements certainly was a much-needed respite. Or so it was meant to be. But reality often betrayed expectations. As soon as they appeared, the Devis first gathered the legion of celestial church members in one spot. Then, a bald, silver-eyed man sitting cross-legged within the air floated toward them. In the middle of his forehead, a vertical eye opened and swept the gathered church members. 3. He stated and beckoned, causing Conrad's 3 spies to appear before him. Their eyes widened in stupor, and seeing the 3 of them chosen out of this sea of individuals, they knew their identities exposed. But how? Clap, clap, clap. A golden-haired man stepped forward, stopping beside the silver-eyed Baldy. As efficient as ever. I sometimes envy you, Brahma's third eye, he declared in a jovial tone before shifting his eyes toward the 3 spies. I know. You're wondering why we could so effortlessly find your traitorous lot out of this sea of people. It does not matter. You should instead be thinking of how to save yourselves. But you can't. The golden-haired man stated, then waved his hand, causing the 3 to burn into ashes. His eyes then swept the gathered church disciples before him, and seeing most of them tremble with glaring fright, he sighed and again waved his hand. All the moon, dream, and paragon spirits, legions of souls, were burned to ashes, not even given the time to scream. Now, only the sun spirits remained. Their eyes widened in a stupor. However, none of the Devis standing by the golden-haired man's side made a comment. The first 3 died because they were enslaved by the enemy and served as his eyes. The rest died because their elders surrendered. Lord Surya, the sun god, was moved by your elders' resolve. Therefore, you shall be treated with courtesy and given the opportunity to follow us back to heaven once we cleanse this world. The golden-haired man explained, causing the sun spirit's stupor to vanish into nothingness. Now, only joy remained. Thank you, lords, for the opportunity. They roared in tandem and kowtowed toward the Devis, but before their foreheads met the ground, the Devis had already vanished. Clearly, they had no interest in the remaining sun spirit's show of loyalty. According to our knowledge, the Tower of Rebirth was built from the combination of Isilia and Marduk's strongest god artifacts. However, it seems to contain principles the 2 of them shouldn't have been able to grasp. Primarily, a connection to Nirvana and other kinds of unknown forces. Since it originates from our house, we Ravmalak naturally wish to study it. Does any one of you have an objection? The golden-haired Deva asked the 2 figures standing beside him. As the leaders and mightiest members of the expedition, only they could call the shots. The silver-eyed Baldy said nothing. However, the slender figure at his right immediately disagreed. Following this reasoning, should we also give you the boy? She rhetorically asked, and the boy she mentioned was naturally Conrad. We are not that greedy. You can have the boy. We only want the tower. Of course, ownership is one thing, but in the future, you should do us the courtesy of involving us in the experiments. he replied toward the lady whose glowing white hairs eclipsed everything else within the room. When he contacted those houses, to avoid pitfalls, Anatole didn't reveal his assumptions on Conrad's true nature, merely stating the truth for what it was. The boy's bloodline was a mystery he couldn't comprehend, but certainly connected to the Ravmalak. At first, they didn't take it too seriously, thinking that the mortal ant was merely exaggerating the situation to obtain their aid. But after browsing through some memories, their attitude underwent a drastic change. Conrad's true nature and the tower were the two reasons why those high-ranking Devis chose to accept the strenuous trip to a mortal world. How could the Mara so readily give him up? But at that time, the silver-eyed Baldy's voice echoed. Handle the tower as you wish. But if the boy's true lineage turns out to be of Nephilim kind, he must die, period. We Brahmas will not allow such an abomination to exist within this world. He cut, his tone calm but uncompromising. Hearing this, the other two shook their heads. In any case, we can discuss handling and repartition after we capture him. Let's go. The three Deva leaders then turned into light beams and shot toward the Holy Continent. Chapter 295 Zenith Ants. Following Conrad's orders, Astarte left to alert her superiors of the current situation. Yvonne, Else, and Verena sat cross-legged within the Empyrean Tower's highest floor, the concealed paradise. Initially, they all stood within their respective quarters, but a series of mental messages made them all gather within Yvonne's chambers. Upon stepping in, the still-armored Astarte bowed in greetings. Your Majesty, your Graces, I believe Master must have already given you a rough briefing. In short, Celestial Realm Devis are on their way as we speak and are very likely to belong to top-ranking houses. Moreover, a new demonic force has risen and cast their eyes on us. Though hard to identify, their bloodline can't be underestimated, and their leaders will undoubtedly be mighty foes. Master asks you to take the reins of the capital while he completes his breakthroughs. Astarte explained in a polite but urgent tone. Dressed in a golden gown embroidered with a tin-headed horned serpent, Yvonne nodded while Else and Verena's eyes shifted toward the unconscious Ziz and Violk who still hovered around Astarte. Although we can't be certain of the involved houses, there is no doubt that the House of Surya will be involved. With their relationship to the Celestial Founder and the Sun Spirits, they will be the first to step in. As for others, Else began while stretching her hand toward the unconscious Ziz who then flew toward her. Depending on the information revealed, the Brahmas might join the fray to cleanse abominations. Verena continued while waiting for Else to finish her investigation of Z's mind. And following 3 seconds of keeping her hand pressed against Z's forehead, Else sneered. Sealed memories. We can't get much from them with the usual method. That being the case, Seer's vision? Her blue eyes shimmered while she peered into Z's past through her Seer's vision. No memory seal could block her sight, and in a flash, the entirety of Z's life unfolded before her. Her eyes contorted into a frown. Seeing this, Verena cast her Seer's vision onto Violk, surrendering him to the same examination. And she too couldn't help but see her face contort from what she saw. Those two were average soldiers within their ant colony and don't have access to critical information. However, from what I've seen, the strength of the demons we will face might trump that of those new Devis. Else said toward Yvonne, who remained silent throughout their examination. They are Zenith ants, labeled as the world scourges in the higher realms. They descend from the primogen Slyvas, and their lineage used to rank extremely high within demonkind. Not only do they possess formidable innate strength, but their reproductive abilities are inarguably the highest of the infernal realm. However, they also possess one nasty habit that led them to antagonize all: slaughter. Just like incubi indulge in lust and crave domination, Zenith ants yearn for destruction and slaughter. They need no reason to descend on worlds and obliterate all that lies within them. In the past, because they directed their destructive tendencies at the celestial realm, the other demon gods chose to turn a blind eye. However, following Asmodeus' fall and Tauratha's ascension as Southern King of Hell, Sliva's believed southern hell weakened and allowed her descendants to wreak havoc within Tauratha's domain. Else explained. Naturally, he didn't take it well. Like many others, Slivaz initially believed that Tauroth must have used some kind of trickery to subjugate Asmodeus and didn't think him to be her match. After all, she'd been cultivating for billions of years, and while she didn't rank among the strongest primogens, she wasn't too far from them. Alas, she wasn't Tauratha's match. He crushed her in battle, destroyed her body and soul, extinguished all the gods of her house, and enslaved the Zenith ants. He then had them sold in high-scale auctions throughout the infernal realm. Verena pursued. Afterward, they were abused throughout eons, and no god ever rose from that lineage. When the time came for Marduk to descend on the ancient crystal world, only one Zenith ant colony remained. All were dispatched to serve as his slaves. However, not long after the descent, believing themselves freed of the infernal realm's god's oppression, they resumed their murdering habits and rebelled. Marduk slaughtered them to the last, or so he thought. A scant few survived by burrowing themselves in the roots of the world tree and gave birth to a new colony. Since then, they've been slowly draining the vitality of the world tree to fuel their growth and empower their physiques. Their leader's current cultivation level is unfathomable. However, because of their ploy against the world tree, the real ant rulers only communicate through mental messages and don't appear to their descendants. The elders are the strongest, visible force. It was the Zenith ants' constant siphoning of the world tree's vitality that triggered the withering. And though Conrad's faction knew nothing of that event beforehand, they were now forced to confront it and the consequences it heralded. At that time, Zamira appeared and bowed toward the trio. Nevertheless, the important thing is to devise a way to keep the anti-divine power screen intact. Be it the Devis or Zenith ants, neither would come if they didn't have confidence in their ability to shatter it. Perhaps they're relying on god artifacts, perhaps they possess some peculiar means. In one case or another, they possess the means to shatter our most critical defense. Although we're no longer what we used to be, and our current force dreads none throughout the mortal realm, our current information is insufficient, and I fear that at best, we're heading toward a Pyrrhic victory. At worst, the consequences are hard to fathom. Zamira appraised, and be it Astarte, Else, Verena, or the silent Yvonne, all were forced to agree. However, agreeing was one thing. Finding a way to resolve the problem, another. Although the Shroud is our most absolute defense against non-deities, while maintaining it, we can't use the tower for anything else. That being the case, let's remove it and crush the next wave with absolute strength. Let us tell the world that the Jade Dynasty fears none beneath the vast blue sky. Yvonne declared, and instantaneously, her harem sisters understood the hidden meaning behind her words. Yes, Your Majesty. Meanwhile, dozens of gray cocoons rose from beneath the world tree, and from them, several dwarf-like figures emerged. Chapter 296. The Devis arrive. In a gray, golden, and magenta beam, the three Deva leaders appeared before the anti-divine screen. The golden-haired Deva and the white-haired Devi eyed it with mild interest, while the silver-eyed Baldi remained indifferent. What an impressive screen. No wonders those lesser creatures were at their wits' ends. The golden-haired Deva appraised with an amused grin, then stretched out his hand. A golden chakram appeared within and glittered with overbearing god force. Clearly, it was a god artifact. With a grin, the golden-haired Deva flung the chakram at the anti-divine screen, but long before it could reach it, the screen vanished. Oh! Surprised, the golden-haired Deva beckoned, and the chakram flew back into his hands. Did they get tired of playing turtles? Or does a welcoming party await us in there? He wondered with the same grin. We will naturally know when we get there. Though, it doesn't hurt to remain cautious. The white-haired Devi replied. You can't be serious. Threading carefully before mere mortals? Come on, what is there to fear? The golden-haired Deva chortled. Clearly, he wasn't putting the Jade Dynasty in his eyes. Akash, your conceit will be your downfall, the Mara Devi stated before locking her eyes on the Jade Capital. With a step, she vanished and reappeared before it. The silver-eyed Baldy had already left the two behind and sat cross-legged within the capital's sky. TSS, TSS, TSS. Those people really don't know how to relax. Though I expected no less of that uptight Baldy, I must say, coming from you, Nahal, it's a bit disappointing. Oh well. He shrugged, then vanished to reappear beside his peers. Together, they swept the capital with their divine senses, attempting to locate the mightiest forces. However, seeing the strongest standing at the saint level, disappointment flashed within their eyes. However, when his divine sense swept the imperial palace, and he felt repelled by an invisible force, a pleasant smile returned on Akash's face. Not bad. His eyes then rose toward the tower within the sky, and his smile broadened. Excellent. This trip really wasn't in vain, Akash declared while ogling the tower with his golden eyes. He then waved his hands, releasing a deluge of bright golden flames that descended onto the Jade Capital. Even the tiniest strand of those flames could burn saints into ashes and make mid-level sages wail in agony. But never would those flames land on the capital, because long before they could, a massive space vortex appeared in their path and redirected them back onto their caster. Interesting. Akash nodded, then waved his hand, dispelling the golden flames. In a twister of light, Else, Verena, and Astarte appeared within the sky, facing the three Devis with indifference. Though their beauty was outstanding, as the scion of one of the mightiest houses of the celestial realm, their beauty alone couldn't faze Akash. However, the indifference with which they daggered him released a current of excitement through his veins. But this was only the first impression. Akash and Nahal both possessed origin sight, while the silver-eyed Baldy's third eye was an inarguably mightier innate ability. Therefore, all three of them could accurately examine the nature of their foe's blood. And what they saw startled them. How queer. Why are things only getting more interesting? A Batet, a Mara, and an inexplicable creature. Akash assessed, but this time, there was no amusement on his face. His eyes turned toward Nahal, who stared at Verena with a deep frown. There was no previous record of a Mara ever landing in the ancient crystal world. If there was, she'd know. How then was one appearing before her? And while he remained silent, surprise shone within the Baldy's silver eyes. First, it's that potential Nephilim. And now, we're faced with a pure-blooded demon, Deva, and a creature of unknown background. I'm afraid someone or something within this Jade Dynasty found a way to reproduce our lineages. The silver-eyed Baldy hypothesized, his words causing Akash to burst into laughter. Yo, Dasra, you don't speak often, but when you do, only earth-shaking words leave your lips. Reproduce our lineages? Are you telling me that Deva and demon blood have turned into cabbage that something can freely hand out? Akash scoffed. Maybe not freely. Maybe not all of them, but at least the ability exists. Dasra seriously replied, his words deepening Nahal's frown. This joke is not funny. What else? Soon you'll be telling me that they can create primogens and freely travel within the three realms. I didn't know you had such humor. Akash shook his head and switched his attention back onto the three ladies. Skepticism rippled on Nahal's face, but she ultimately voiced no opinion. Dasra said nothing more. Feeling their foe's stupor, Verena and Elsa's lips curled into grins. While cutting buffoons mid-talk is not in my habits, I must say this is neither the place nor time to be expressing your stupor. Else sniped with a derisive smile. Oh? And where would the place be? A nice dinner under the sunset? Perhaps you wish to accompany me? Surely, a beauty of your caliber knows to seek an adequate tree. If you purr well enough, I can make you my new maid. Akash retorted, undisturbed by the insult. Hearing this, Else arched her eyebrows. People have died for less, but I am not people. Dash. Akash burst into laughter and stepped forward. Clearly, you've been allowed to run amok for so long that you don't know the immensity of heavens. Because if you think your measly divine seed cultivation is enough to terrorize me, you're sorely mistaken. Akash sneered, and bright golden flames erupted from his form, discoloring the atmosphere as if all were forced into a world of burning gold. And indeed, through his origin sight, he could effortlessly see that Verena and Elsa's cultivations were now at the early stage of the divine seed rank. Godson Akash, Ravmalak Lord, and grandson of the sun god Surya. Extraordinary divine power erupted from Akash's form, stretching throughout the sky and crackling space as it spread. Peak stage divine ascension. Else and Verena whispered, the words ushering the realization that this would be no simple fight. However, they remained undaunted and stretched out their hands. In a twister of light, a golden armor replaced the dresses they previously wore. At the back of those armors, 5 pairs of golden wings lightly flapped. Clearly, you don't understand the quagmire you've stepped into. Come, allow us to show you the might of the House of Conrad. Else declared with a captivating smirk, then stepped forward while Verena's eyes locked on Nahal. Chapter 297 Jade Consorts vs. Godchildren. Without neither hesitation or fancy style, Akash vanished appeared at Elsa's side and using his right hand as a knife, chopped at her neck. Else didn't evade, allowing the blow to approach unimpeded. But as it reached her neck, a bright golden aura erupted from her armor, stopping Akash's hand an inch away from it. His eyes widened in disbelief. Although this was but a casual strike, even in the celestial realm, beneath divine ascension, not many could so leisurely receive it. But he wasn't given time to ponder any further that Else was backhanding him across the cheek. Bending his waist and spinning on the left, Akash let the blow graze his cheek while sending a golden flame-coated kick straight into Elsa's breastplate. Again, the golden armor and aura absorbed the blow, leaving no damage on Elsa's body. But using the impact, Akash propelled himself backward, vanishing to reappear where he previously stood. His face contorted into a frown. Oh, after all this talk, is this all a godson is capable of? How disappointing. Else snarked with bare ridicule. Hearing this, Akash's frown deepened. However, he was forced to admit he'd underestimated the opponent. No, he underestimated that armor. Clearly, it was neither a divine nor a god artifact, and yet, it didn't lose out to the average god artifact. Worse, it clearly concealed formidable offensive power. Never did he bear witness to such a strange cloak. Nahal, who stood several steps away from him, stared at the same armor that covered Verena's hourglass figure, and interest shone within her eyes. This was a formidable tool. If they could seize it for themselves, their battle power would soar. Anyone would be interested. Only Dasra, the silver-eyed Baldy, never spared the armor more than a glance. And within, no desire rippled. No need to hold back. Fight at full strength, capture those women, and snatch their armors. Perhaps we've just discovered a just as valuable treasure as the tower. Nahal stated, then stretched out her hands, causing a vast shroud of magenta fog to erupt from her body and spread throughout the atmosphere while her eyes shimmered in the same color and her glowing white hairs fluttered at her back. Ancestral glory, citadel of dreams, she exclaimed, and from within the magenta fog rose 3 gargantuan citadels from which a soothing, enchanting melody rippled. It was as if the choir of a celestial host descended from heaven's vault to enlighten the mortal world. White and magenta clouds bloated the sky, and the area soon turned into a realm controlled by Nahal's will. The fake can never match the true, the low cannot outpace the lofty. Even if your bloodline mirrors mine, without the noble blood of our primogen flowing within your veins, you cannot showcase our ancestral glory. Nahal scoffed, then vanished, becoming one with the ancestral glory. The citadel's gates opened, releasing a celestial army that shot toward Verena. Her lips curled into a smile. and she too stretched out her hands. Ancestral glory, citadel of dreams, Verena exclaimed, and again, the same scene occurred. Magenta fog erupted from her, conquering the atmosphere while 3 chanting citadels rose and opened their doors to release vast celestial armies that clashed with Nahal's. And as the 2 ancestral glories clashed, astonishment filled the 3 Devis. And indeed, this time, even the silent Dasra was no exception. Be it lineage weapons or ancestral glories, they both were the properties of the Primogen and passed down through their blood. Only demons and Devis able to retrace their lineage to a Primogen could wield lineage weapons and ancestral glories. In the case of a contract or blessing, the recipient could receive a weaker version of his master's lineage weapon or ancestral glory. However, unless born from one of the Primogen's descendants, their children would not inherit the lineage right. For that reason, regardless of bloodline level, within the higher realms, the simple fact of wielding a lineage weapon or ancestral glory was a proof of nobility. Even if the absurd assumption that those mortals found a way to reproduce higher realm bloodlines were true, how could they also summon the lineage rights? I never expected that we would come for 2 precise targets, and before laying hands on them, have so many more appear. Good. Then let's not waste any more time. Ancestral glory, 9 heavenly stars. Akash roared, causing 9 bright golden suns to appear in the sky and illuminate the world. With their appearance, a part of the atmosphere was forcefully snatched to become his domain, the realm where his will would become law. He too vanished, becoming one with his domain. And as the pressure of Akash's domain was added to Nahal's, Else and Verena found themselves suppressed. My turn, Else began while raising her right hand. Awaken and release the sea of reincarnation. Ankh of myriad eternity. In a massive eruption of demonic energies, a dark yellow ankh appeared before Else, hovering above her palm and releasing a boundless yellow sea that freed Else of Akash's suppression and threatened to collapse his absolute control of the area. Meanwhile, Astarte's eyes had never left Dasra, whose eyes remained closed throughout the startling clash. "You're not going to make a move?" she asked, feeling that the nearby battle was nearing a crescendo. "You are not my match, and I believe your lineage is not intolerable to heaven's will. Therefore, there is no need to end your life. The same goes for them," Dasra stated, and his words caused Astarte's eyes to widen in a stupor. When even his peers were finding it so challenging to eliminate Else and Verena, he dared utter such words. Where was his confidence hailing from? Boom, boom, boom. At that time, empowered by the seemingly endless force of their 5-winged Valkyrie armors, the combination between Else and Verena's attacks collided with Akash and Nahal's ancestral glories, releasing an earth-shaking explosion of celestial and infernal forces that would have laid the holy continent to waste were it not for the protective formations activated to suppress the battle's effects. Crack, crack, crack. Both Nahal and Akash were forced out of their ancestral glories and returned to the Jade Capital's sky with frustration dressing their faces. How shameful! To think that I, a grandson of the sun god, would one day struggle against a foe by 3 ranks my inferior. If this matter were to spread, where would my face go? Akash sighed, and though she didn't speak the words, Nahal thought the same. Was it not for those damnable armors? How could they withstand our blows? Since they wish to bully us with arms, there is no need to be courteous. Nahal replied, and stretched out her hand, summoning a sea-blue shuttle which rippled with endless god force. Seeing this, Akash grinned and summoned his golden chakram, which also released vast god force. But even though they now faced god artifacts, Verena and Else didn't lose their composure. They weren't here to win. They just didn't have to lose. And as far as not losing was concerned, they overflowed with confidence. Chapter 298, Altering the Pa. With their god artifacts empowering them, the pressure emanating from Nahal and Akash soared to unprecedented level, while their battle power approached the sub-god limit, becoming infinitely close to deities. Akash flung his chakram into the sky, and it expanded to reach 300 meters of diameters, with its metallic edge turning into bright golden flames. Blinding light erupted from the chakram, and it was as if it had turned into the universe's most radiant sun, aiming to erase the sinful with its otherworldly radiance. Before such a force, neither Verena nor Else could resist. But beside Akash, Nihal too released her sea shuttle, which expanded into a 300 meters long flying battleship around which a sea formed and swirled. To say nothing of the two of them combined, five-winged Valkyrie armor or not, with their current strength, either Akash or Nihal could effortlessly trample their foes. This truth was evident to all, and yet Verena and Else didn't budge. Akash and Nahal joined their hands, causing a gold and blue sea to burst from their respective artifacts and soar toward the two jade consorts. But as the irresistible destructive force descended, Verena and Else's lips curved into amused grins. "Ready? Ready. Seer's vision," they exclaimed in tandem, and instantaneously, the world around Else, Verena, Akash, and Nahal turned gray, and the irresistible strikes about to drop vanished into nothingness. The gray color disappeared, replaced by a clear atmosphere that showed no trace of the previous strike. And were it not for the two god artifacts hanging above Nahal and Akash's head, the onlookers would have been forced to believe that they never attempted a strike, to begin with. "Queer, weren't we about to strike?" "Indeed," they muttered in confusion and exchanged the same folding glances. For the first time since his arrival, Dasra's eyes widened in a profound stupor. Altering the past. The fourth ancient secret, Seer's vision. He stated, but still didn't come to his partner's aid. His eyes went beyond them, locking on the tower which made no noise since the beginning of the battle. But the quieter it was, the more Dasra believed that it stood like the sword of Damocles, about to drop at any time. Unaware that their past had been altered to modify the present, Akash and Nahal resumed their assault. And once again, Verena and Else used their seer's vision to remodel the past. This time, however, they pushed the vice to another level, making it so that Akash and Nahal targeted one another instead. By the time they realized what was going on, it was too late. The golden sun rays and flaming sea barreled into the boundless sea as Akash's golden chakram and Nahal's sea blue shuttle contended for supremacy. How could this be? Why did I? They wondered, far too late. Boom! A massive explosion thundered, and the two flew backward while spurting large mouthfuls of blood. In the meantime, faint blood lines dropped from the corners of Else and Verena's lips while they suppressed a blood spurt of their own. Clearly, they didn't wish to reveal the extent of the backlash they suffered. And as the two celestials flew in opposite directions, the Empyrean Tower kicked into gear. Black and white light swirled around its form, becoming two sky-rending beams that slammed into the recoiling pair. Again, they flew backward, this time shooting toward Dasra, and before they could bypass him, another black-white beam shot toward them. But before it could hit home, the sitting Dasra crossed his forearms in a block, receiving the move for all three of them. Boom! Another wild explosion thundered, but as the smoke dispersed, Dasra's unblemished form remained. Meanwhile, Akash and Nahal had recovered their stances in the air, wiping off the blood coating their lips. Could it be? Nahal began, and before she could finish her words, "Yes, you fell prey to Seer's vision." Dasra cut, then stood up, and hearing the confirmation, although doubts sparkled in their minds, Akash and Nahal were still scared witless. Scared, because even within the higher realms, not everyone could lay hands on the ancient secrets. Only the top descendants of the mightiest houses possessed the honor, and even among them, most would need to wait for godhood before receiving one. In this generation, the celestial chosen and infernal stars aside, what non-deity could wield ancient secrets? Moreover, in the hierarchy of ancient secrets, Seer's vision was at the top. This was completely absurd. Could it be that they represent a secret force jointly groomed by mighty demon and deva gods? Otherwise, How could all those coincidences occur? This is completely ridiculous. Akash hypothesized, pulling an approving nod from Nehal. Dasra, however, made no comment and stepped forward. With every step, the pressure emanating from his form soared, and his muscles, showcased by his sleeveless monk robe, rippled with irresistible force. Yet, his presence didn't disturb the atmosphere, and it was almost as if he stood in harmony with nature itself. Verena and Else now realized that this monk-like Baldy wasn't just a little bit stronger than his peers. They didn't play in the same league at all. And Kron, who, from within the tower, observed this scene by Yvonne's side, made a shocking appraisal. The infernal founder at his peak wasn't much stronger. Those were startling news. Marduk was the second infernal star of his time, the number 2 talent of the infernal realm. Were it not for the abnormal Malcolm's existence, he would have definitely been the first. Someone not much weaker would easily rank among the most gifted celestial chosen. Yet, Dasra was no celestial chosen. And as if anticipating the question swirling within his foe's mind, he declared, "Brahmas do not pursue vain, worldly glory. Therefore, we abjure all titles and distinction." As he spoke, he stopped before the 2 jade consorts, his pressure suppressing them where they stood. Even their golden armors couldn't save them from his might. "You are not my match. Retreat, and tell the one within the tower to show himself." Dasra ordered, and threw a casual palm strike. That simple palm released a plethora of vibrations that could, at the very least, send Verena and Else crash on the ground below. But before it could, black and white light erupted from the tower, warding them from the vibrations. Dasra again threw a palm, and a new wave of vibrations shattered the black and white light protection. Verena and Else recoiled, and as they did, the iron taste of blood filled their mouths. But before Dasra could make another move, in a twister of dark light, a mesmerizing figure clad in jade armor, with 6 wings sprouting from her back, appeared to receive the move and dispel its force. Naturally, it was Yvonne. "Easy, Baldy, your opponent has just arrived," she declared while releasing the full might of her pressure to resist Dasra's. His eyes flashed with a subtle glint. Chapter 299, The Unfathomable Dasra. As soon as Yvonne landed on the scene, all eyes descended upon her. Feeling a pressure that didn't lose out to theirs at full strength, Nehal and Akash frowned. Of course, this was the merit of the 6-winged Valkyrie armor. Without it, depending on her half-step divine blood cultivation alone, Yvonne would not be their match. Alas, the conditional mattered not on the battlefield. The 6 pairs of jade wings at Yvonne's back lightly flapped while her similarly colored armor released a dazzling aura that coated the entirety of her riveting figure. 5 high-grade divine physiques, all nearing mastery. A top-level bloodline, a perfect cultivation foundation, a mighty Tao, and a dauntless heart. "You are a worthy foe." Dasra appraised through the use of his vertical, third eye, and seeing how easily he saw through her, mild surprise flashed within Yvonne's eyes. But when recalling the lineage she faced and Kron's appraisal of her opponent, all surprise vanished, and a smile curved her luscious lips. "Were we at the same cultivation level, I would not be your match. However, we're not. I have no interest in clashing with your lot. I only have one target. Make him show himself, and you don't need to suffer." Dasra stated with a calm and indifferent tone. Naturally, his words failed to garner Yvonne's approval, and instead, she stretched out her right hand. In a twister of light, a long jade spear appeared within her right hand. Just like Astarte's sword, this spear was nothing more than an extension of her Valkyrie armor. "You don't have an appointment. As an outsider, you need to follow the formal process to see the Emperor. First, request audience and await his graceful approval. If you don't follow proper etiquette, I can't help you." Yvonne shrugged while lifting the jade-colored spear toward Dasra. Her words failed to disturb that immovable face of his. "That being the case, I can only force him out through you all," Dasra replied and stepped forward. The already enormous pressure emanating from his form rose to another level while strands of silver light rose from his pore and laced his figure. Without another word, he shot toward Yvonne, or rather, glided toward her, leaving dozens of afterimages in his wake. By the time he landed before her, his left palm was already flying toward her face. Yvonne swept her jade spear toward the palm strike, but before it could reach it, the palm vanished, becoming thousands of palms that assailed her from all sides. Her jade-colored aura spread toward the palms, meeting their onslaught while she used the impact to recoil and step out of Dasra's range. But before she could escape him, he again was upon her, this time surrounding her with 72 afterimages that all attacked in tandem, bloating the sky with the thousands of palm strikes. Each palm brought with it the strength to obliterate a vast mountain range, and all of them combined could collapse continents. Faced with such an overwhelming force, Yvonne dared not hold back. Awaken and drown my enemies in inferno. Hell's Reach. In a demonic explosion of hellfire and dark sand that repelled Dasra's assault, Hell's Reach landed in Yvonne's left hand. Lineage weapon in the left and Valkyrie weapon in the right, she spread her wings and flew back toward Dasra, meeting his every blow with her spear strokes. In an instant, they exchanged thousands of moves, but throughout the clash, Dasra never recoiled. Not even from one tiny step. Nature law, Dasra uttered, causing tremendous divine power to erupt in the manifestation of his nature law. Hundreds of towering trees appeared in the sky and stretched toward the ground while expanding their branches within the air. The trees all surrounded Yvonne, releasing forest green light and tens of thousands of leaves that barreled into her at lightning speed. Waving Hell's Reach, Yvonne released a sea of hellfire that drowned the incoming leaves and spread toward the trees. However, a protective halo coated them, and as the two forces collided, a massive explosion erupted, forcing Yvonne to recoil from 7 steps. Witnessing this exchange, Verena and Elsa's eyes contorted into a frown. Dasra's strength had already surpassed all their expectations and forced them to consider assisting Yvonne in contending with him. And to say nothing of them, even Akash and Nehal were startled. Akash, in particular, couldn't believe his eyes. Although his father had warned him of Dasra being stronger than him, he'd not expected the gap to be this profound. I heard that 300 years ago, Dasra single-handedly fought and repelled 3 minor gods from the infernal realm. At first, I believed the tale nothing more than a rumor. But now, I am starting to wonder if it weren't an understatement. Among the current celestial chosen, how many can rival him? To say nothing of defeating him. Nehal sighed. Although strength wasn't her primary pursuit, it undoubtedly was a comfortable insurance. And to see one she thought her peers so far ahead of her, she couldn't help but feel cheated. In this case, how could they possibly discuss as equal? And when Dasra's hands landed on Conrad, who could stop him from slaughtering him? But as she pondered how to cope with the future events, Dasra joined his hands. Ancestral glory, realm of eternal peace. The scenery changed, becoming an idyllic land of 33 floating islands on top of which various creatures stood in harmony. The jade capital vanished from sight, and in the eyes of the gathered folks, lush green prairies stood below, while they all took turns on the floating islands, exploring the peaceful paradises while surrendering to the desire of peace. In that instant, the belief that war, battle, and bloodshed were inherently sinful filled the minds of the gathered individuals. Yvonne was no exception, and as the belief settled within her mind, she found herself slowly lowering her weapon, unable to find a reason to bear it within such a perfect land. But before she could completely surrender, her eyes shone with renewed vigor. Darkness Law, Unending Hell, Valkyrie Judgment. In succession, Yvonne used her 3 mightiest moves. Darkness filled the sky, engulfing everything across thousands of miles. Storms of hellfire and dark sand rose, slamming against the idyllic land, and from the tip of Yvonne's jade spear, a ball of jade lightning rose, expanding until it reached 300 meters, before turning into a blinding beam fired at a specific spot. Impressive willpower. Dasra commented from within his ancestral glory. Heaven of the 33, he exclaimed, and from the 33 islands, one rose to become the center of them all, channeling their vast defensive and offensive power in a supreme strike that collided with Yvonne's 3 moves. Boom. In another thunderous boom, the scenery collapsed, returning to the jade capital sky. But though she'd successfully escaped Dasra's ancestral glory, Yvonne felt no joy. From beginning to end, he didn't summon a single artifact. It was as if he always controlled the battle's flow and could counter everything thrown at him. Pooh. Blood jetted from Yvonne's lips as her body processed its internal damage. Meanwhile, Dasra stood within the sky as unblemished as ever. Give up while you still can, Dasra advised with the same indifferent tone. But as she whipped the blood from her lips, Yvonne's lips curled into a brand-new smile, and her eyes gleamed with rising battle intent. I'm afraid we're only getting started. Absolute war sense. Yvonne raised her head and bellowed, activating her ancient secret and causing her battle power to soar while an illusory version of her appeared before Dasra. Chapter 300 Alarming Breakthrough. By the time the illusory Yvonne appeared before him, Dasra already clawed at her neck. But as the move neared target, a violent kick hammered Dasra's left side, sending him spiraling in the air across several backflips before stabilizing himself. Not giving him any time to rest, the illusory Yvonne surrounded him with hundreds of punches, claws, spears, and kicks, each carrying 1,000 times the might of the original body, which now also seemed to be in an illusory stage. If at first Dasra barely managed to block the moves, soon, he was utterly overwhelmed by the armada of blows that rained upon him from all sides and hurled him higher in the sky. A frown contorted his silver eyes. Hateful, hateful, incomparably hateful. Akash snapped, unable to endure this sight. And at his right, Nahal's mood wasn't much better, because both of them could see the source of Yvonne's massive strength leap. Third ancient secret, absolute war sense. And at the very least, her cultivation has reached the 3rd layer. In the instant she activated her ancient secret, it could be said that Yvonne turned into a war sense with 1,000 times the strength, speed, and reaction time of her original body. With such a staggering strength leap, even Dasra was pushed onto the defensive. Barreled by the flurry of blows, Dasra's guard finally collapsed, and Yvonne sent him cratering below with an axe kick. Boom! Dasra's fall triggered a vast surge of dust that soared into the sky to cloud the vision of the warring parties. But as the dust dispersed, Dasra rose from the ground, without the tiniest scratch on his seemingly unbreakable body. This durability is almost comparable to Conrad's, Yvonne murmured while keeping her Hessenite eyes locked on Dasra. To have cultivated the absolute war sense to the 3rd layer with less than 1,000 years of cultivation, I must say that your comprehension skills rank among the highest I've seen in my life. Your potential is exceptionally high. In the future, you can surely become a mighty goddess. Why persist in seeking damnation? Dasra calmly asked while stepping back into the sky. Clearly, Yvonne's demonic blood mattered not to him. In fact, he would be glad to see her fulfill her potential. However, Yvonne merely shook her head. Dasra asked nothing more, and for the first time since his arrival, adopted an actual battle stance. With his weight on his right leg and his fists firmly clenched, Dasra again faced Yvonne. Will of the Great Warden, Celestial Guardian. The silver light strands lacing Dasra's form expanded into a full-blown silver giant nigh identical to his true body. Dasra stood in the giant's lower abdomen, and the onlooker could effortlessly see that the two were one. One of the most dreadful physiques of the celestial realm, the Great Warden physique. Yvonne realized. The Great Warden physique was unique to the Warden's house, and the Brahma were the Warden's house. Without budging from where he stood, Dasra punched out, releasing a horrible force that opened a gigantic vortex in space before slamming into Yvonne's war sense. Boom! Struck by the invisible force, like a meteor, she shot across the sky, before cratering in the distance. At that time, Verena and Else no longer hesitated. Although they knew Yvonne wanted to use this opportunity to further tamper herself, if things were allowed to carry on in this way, there would soon be nothing left to tamper. Valkyrie Surge. Like a perfectly synchronized choir, they activated their Valkyrie Surge, causing their battle power to overlap. Seer's Vision. Then cast their Seer's Vision onto Dasra. Good effort. Alas, I am a Brahma, and your soul power is far too low. Eye of Illumination. The vertical, third eye on Dasra's forehead opened, releasing a dazzling silver light that obliterated Else and Verena's Seer's Vision, forcing them to recoil with large blood spurts. But before he could make another move, Yvonne was shooting back toward him. But this time, 1,000 divine artifacts surrounded her. Since conventional fighting yielded no result, she used her absolute war sense to simultaneously control 1,000 divine artifacts, ready to repel the enemy by burning the state treasury. Even for the current Jade dynasty, the loss of 1,000 divine artifacts was a significant blow. But at this juncture, she couldn't care about any of that. Detona, Yvonne began, but before she could complete the 1,000 divine artifacts detonation, Dasra aimed his right fist at her. Celestial Blockade. 12 light pillars appeared around her, and instantaneously, she was locked where she stood, unable to make another move. In that instant, the truth of her defeat became evident. You fought well. Your sword is likely used to crushing enemies leagues above your level. However, I have defeated gods. Throughout the three realms, in the past or present, I believe that the Primogens and Malkamicide, regardless of the tricks used, no one can defeat me with an inferior cultivation level. Dasra professed, before aiming his fist for the final blow. But at that time, ha 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 ha, ha 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 ha. A cacophony of malevolent laughter reverberated within the sky, breaking Dasra's pace. Within the Empyrean Tower, Conrad sat cross-legged, condensing his illusory stars one after the other. 1, 2, 3, 34, 35, 36. In an instant, he condensed 36, reaching the usual limit. But with his unrivaled soul power, how could he stop there? The 37th took shape, then a 38th, a 39th, and a 40th. Tapping in his reserves, Conrad made one last push and successfully congealed the 41 star. There, he stopped and officially broke through to star connection. And at that time, the ancient crystal world sky darkened, from the barbarian continent all the way to the holy continent. No piece of heaven was spared. Dark clouds billowed, crackling with lightning and the impending descent of legions of thunderbolts. The Overlord did not appear. Neither did the Warden, for Conrad no longer belonged to their jurisdiction. On this occasion that he again broke cultivation convention, only the realm wills could judge him. Grrrr. The sky grumbled and released dozens of pure blue lightning bolts that slammed into the Empyrean Tower, bypassing its defenses to descend upon Conrad. Undisturbed, he stood up and opened his mouth. Innate skill, devouring. Without a hitch, Conrad directly swallowed the heavenly tribulation, using it to improve on perfection and let his cultivation base soar. As the blue thunderbolts vanished, white thunderbolts followed, only to be swallowed within Conrad's gluttonous belly. Black lightning then descended and received the same fate. The 41 illusory stars went from intangible to tangible, becoming genuine stars that rippled with endless stellar power as Conrad directly reached star manifestation. He then stretched out his hands, connecting the 41 stars to his body and merging with them all in one go. Hence, reaching the peak of star fusion. Endless jade-colored star force undulated around his form, while his cultivation stabilized at the peak of the Holy Road. Feeling the terrible force rising from within the tower, Dasra no longer hesitated, and to avoid variables, resolved to first dispatch the Valkyries before him. The silver light giant punched, its fist descending upon Yvonne, threatening to end her. But before it could, a teenaged-looking man with long, fluttering jade hairs, golden eyes, and Empyrean looks, appeared and blocked the silver light giant's fist within his right palm. This youth wore a golden robe embroidered with a 10-headed horned serpent. That robe, combined with the golden jade crown resting on his head, made his status evident. "Profane prince," Dasra murmured, and attempted to free his giant fist from Conrad's palm. However, he couldn't. "At your disservice," Conrad leisurely replied. Chapter 301: The Might of a Shameless Miscreant. Following Conrad's appearance, Dasra, Akash, and Nahal's eyes fell on him, each with varying degrees of surprise. Akash, who always relished in his splendid appearance, found Conrad's figure quite punchable, while Nahal failed to restrain the pleasant surprise look in her eyes. Although they'd already seen glimpses of him through memories, the real deal far outpaced images. Dasra, however, remained as calm and steady as before. Bright silver light erupted from his fist, allowing him to shake off Conrad's control before retreating on several steps. "Took you long enough?" Yvonne remarked with a false hint of dissatisfaction. "That is natural. As a monarch, I must ensure my entrances overflow with magnificence. Surely, you must understand my plight." Conrad replied with a mischievous grin, causing Verena to sigh, else to shake her head, Yvonne to roll her eyes, and to start to not know whether to laugh or cry. Only Kron, who observed the scene from within the tower, found those words perfectly reasonable. For a brief moment, Dasra's eyes went between the profane pair before finally locking on Conrad. His third eye opened, scrutinizing every nook and cranny of Conrad's existence. "I can see it. Your existence goes against heaven's will. You are an abomination," he stated in a mild tone that served as a sharp contrast to the implications of his words. Abomination, monster, wife-robber, despicable, with neither moral nor virtue, and the list goes on. All these perfectly define me, and I take them all as praises. Conrad acknowledged while shifting his attention back onto Dasra. "Though, I wonder if you can see what's about to happen," Conrad began, but before he could finish his words, though he still stood where he previously was, another version of him was encasing his right fist in Dasra's silver giant face, shooting it across the sky, like a dazzling silver meteor, to crash at the edge of the holy continent, tens of thousands of miles in the distance. "Now, but I guess you cannot," Conrad finished, and the afterimage he left behind vanished alongside his words. Nahal and Akash were horrified. Why am I starting to feel that descending onto this world wasn't such a good idea? Akash wondered with his widened eyes staring at Conrad. "I'm afraid it's a bit too late for this train of thought," Nahal replied with her eyes locked on Conrad's relaxed form. Ignoring them, Conrad stepped forward, vanishing to reappear at the holy continent's border where Dasra cratered. With another step, he appeared beside Dasra, who slowly rose from the ground and sent him flying back toward the Jade Capital. "Leaving the battlefield unauthorized violates martial laws. Shame on you," Conrad admonished in a serious tone while reappearing on top of Dasra's silver light giant's head and firing a kick at the middle of its skull. Again, Dasra cratered, this time, in the Jade Capital's ground. "What kind of guest makes such a mess in the host's house? How uncouth. I will have to send you the bill later on." Conrad sighed with his hands crossed beneath his back, and hearing this, though Nahal managed to suppress herself, Akash didn't possess such self-control. Where did such a shameless miscreant emerge from? Clearly, he's the one wreaking havoc in the land. How did it become our turn to pay the bill? Akash roared in indignation. Alas, he found no support in Nahal, who merely shook her head. Crack. At that time, the cracking sound of rolling rubble echoed alongside the climb of Dasra, who again rose from the ground. And though those 3 blows slammed him across tens of thousands of miles, within the silver light giant, Dasra's body showcased no damage. "You are strong. Stronger than I expected. Good, then I'm not wronging you," he declared while assuming his battle stance. Ancestral glory, realm of eternal peace. Dasra exclaimed, and again. His mighty ancestral glory covered the atmosphere, turning the world into that idyllic paradise of 33 celestial islands floating above an Elysian landscape of lush green prairies and various creatures standing in harmony. In that world, race divided none. In that world, demons, devas, and humans all held hands with no barriers separating them. War didn't exist, slaughter was a myth, and blissful peace reigned throughout eternity. Within that world, for the fraction of a second, Conrad experienced the appeal of that blissful land full of joy and candid laughter. But as soon as the sensation flashed within his mind, it vanished. Conrad waved his hand, causing his imperial jade seal to appear while his golden jade crown shone with gold and jade light. That light stretched throughout the atmosphere, threatening to collapse the eternal paradise. The imperial jade seal then turned into a meteor, shooting toward a hidden location within the sky, and expanding as it went. But before it could hit home, Dasra's voice again echoed. Heaven of the 33. Just like with Yvonne, one island among the 33 rose to become the center of them all, making the remaining 32 swirl around it while releasing monstrous, destructive power. But this time, the height of this destructive force had already surpassed all Dasra displayed beforehand. With the central island guiding them all, the 33 islands released their supreme strike, barreling into the imperial jade seal in an earth-shaking explosion. Boom! The mirage of peace vanished, but knocking off the jade seal, the blow still carried on unimpeded, aiming to obliterate Conrad where he stood. Indeed, with Conrad as his opponent, Dasra no longer held back, and every move aimed for his life. But Conrad didn't evade, first pulling back his imperial jade seal before stretching out his hands. Ascended Titan form. This time, Conrad's height didn't increase, remaining at 9 meters. However, 49 additional pairs of arms still emerged from his side, each carrying the strength to lay a continent to waste. With his 100 arms, Conrad unleashed thousands of punches into the air, each releasing dreadful shockwaves that slammed into Dasra's strike. Boom! The move collapsed, and alongside it, so did the 33 islands. The red prism mark on Conrad's forehead glittered, and he vanished to reappear before Dasra with one hand aimed toward his face. Innate skill. Extinction? Conrad uttered, releasing a blinding wave of jade light that stretched throughout the atmosphere. Dasra's silver light giant collapsed, and though it didn't move from an inch, his true body experienced unprecedented damage with his internal organs spiraling out of control and blood gushing from all his orifices. What a formidable constitution! Conrad sneered and crashed his 100 fists into Dasra's body. Crack. Yes, for the first time, Dasra's bones crackled, wincing in pain under the brutal assault, and he flew backward before slamming into an invisible barrier Conrad raised to avoid further damaging his land. Pooh! As his back slammed into the barrier, Dasra spurted blood, but ultimately regained balance and straightened himself within the air. Never did I expect that a peak-level saint would one day push me to this extent. I suppose this is my oversight. No wonders heavens doesn't tolerate the existence of your kind. Dasra professed while lifting his eyes back toward Conrad. At that moment, Akash and Nahul vanished to reappear by his side. Let's join hands to eliminate him at the fastest pace, they offered. However, Dasra shook his head. Since the foe is mighty, we should at least give him the opportunity to shine at his brightest before extinguishing the flame of his life. Such is my code, Dasra declared while joining his hands in a prayer sign and crossing his legs within the sky. He closed his eyes, but as he did, the third, vertical one opened, glittering with endless force. Mount Meru. Chapter 302 Mount Meru. The contours of a gargantuan mountain appeared at Dasra's back. As it congealed into reality, that mountain pierced the clouds, going far beyond what the eye could see. In the span of a breath, the mountain fully manifested itself, towering at more than 80 kilometers. The northern side of that mountain was of pure gold, the southern of lapis lazuli, the eastern of crystal, and the western of ruby. Around that mountain, the sun and moon hovered, and below, a cosmic sea rose. Dasra vanished, reappearing on top of the mountain with his legs still crossed and his hands joined in a prayer sign. The sixth ancient secret, Mount Meru, Conrad appraised with his eyes locked on the gargantuan mountain. Starting from the seventh to the second, ancient secrets were not truly ranked on strength, but more on difficulty and how scarce they were in the three realms. Because they usually played different roles and came with various requirements, saying which one trumped another was a daunting task. Mount Meru was both a defensive and offensive art with 4 layers. With each, its size rose exponentially. At the fourth, it was more than 1 million kilometers wide, effortlessly able to obliterate a mortal solar system. Clearly, Dasra was far from the fourth layer. Conrad estimated that he'd barely stepped into the second one. However, that alone was enough to crush all. Yet, the sight of that formidable force able to squash the ancient crystal world into dust and debris couldn't cause a ripple on his serene face. You and I have neither grievances nor hatred, but for the sake of heaven's will, I must wipe you out of existence, body, and soul. Please forgive me. Dasra proclaimed and rested his hands against his thighs in a lotus position. His Mount Meru then turned into a magnificent meteor to plummet onto the ancient crystal world. And though Conrad was its sole target, should he fall to this move, and the aftermath left unchecked, the result would be world destruction. Before such a force, to say nothing of Conrad's faction, even Dasra's fellow Devis were frightened. Dasra, are you out of your bloody mind? Stop this at once. Akash bellowed, but to no avail. Dasra carried on, descending alongside his Mount Meru onto Conrad and the ancient crystal world. But as he did, Conrad stretched out his hands, and in a twister of dark purple light, a dark purple armor replaced his golden robe. At the back of that armor, 6 pairs of wings sprouted, while on top of the armor's shoulder, 3 pairs of horns stood. Nefarious dark purple energy rippled from that armor, echoing with a forbidden force that clashed with the atmosphere as if conflicting with nature itself. Clad in this armor, Conrad didn't budge, welcoming Dasra's ultimate strike with wide-open arms. Asterisk boom. Star. One rumbling shockwave shook the world as Dasra's Mount Meru collided with Conrad. But instead of obliterating him, of squashing him into dust and releasing a vast destructive force that would have ruined this mortal world, Mount Meru did nothing. And the force it was meant to release onto Conrad flowed in reverse to smash a confused Dasra with twice the force. Asterisk barong. Star. Mount Meru detonated, and Dasra shot across the sky, traversing the ancient crystal world's thermosphere, an exosphere, to land into space. And this time, even the great Warden Physique's absolute resilience couldn't protect him. Everything from below his waist and one of his arms directly exploded in blood fog while he orbited in space, alone, unconscious, floating torso. Ha 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 ha. There is a road to heaven, but you do not want it. There is no road to hell, but you insist on diving in. Conrad burst into laughter, and that vile laugh, combined with the eerie dark purple, flame-like aura coating his armor, filled Akash and Nahal with a new round of fright. But when they processed what they just witnessed, that fright turned into full-blown panic. Might reversal. This is the sole ability of the might reversal physique, and at the very least, of a high-grade divine physique. Did my brain get kicked by a donkey? What the hell is going on? Akash stammered. As a celestial realm scion, he naturally knew of the 3 forbidden physiques and the calamities they rained on their owners. But never did he hear of a cultivator wielding the might reversal physique. This simply wasn't possible. Worse, Conrad showed none of the crippling congenital disease a might reversal physique owner should possess. It's not him. It's the armor. Nahal realized in awe, and indeed, she was right. For the Hidden Moon Pavilion, Conrad studied and created a four-winged black crystal armor whose might was slightly above the four-winged Valkyrie armor. But how could he not create anything for himself? Thanks to the 8th level of the main quest, he obtained two things. The first was an improvement to the system's physique grinder. After completing that quest, the physique grinder evolved into physique extractor, able to pull out the physique of anyone Conrad tossed into it and lock it within the system. Afterward, Conrad could upgrade that physique through EXP and seal it into anything. As soon as he obtained it, he summoned the 7th von Jürgen Prince Clemens and tossed him into the physique extractor, pulling out his might reversal physique and thus freeing him of both his long-standing affliction and unparalleled ability. Alas, Conrad realized that if he sealed that physique within his body, he couldn't escape Clemens' fate and would also turn into a cripple. Therefore, he used the best materials at his disposal, a massive quantity of god blood, and the entirety of the incubus god's bones, to refine a new armor. That armor, even the strong among minor gods couldn't dent. Afterward, Conrad improved and sealed the might reversal physique into the armor, turning it into the most absolute of defenses beneath the true god rank. But as a consequence of its conception method, that armor breathed malevolence and would effortlessly corrupt and corrode the feeble. But naturally, Conrad had no difficulty wielding it. He beckoned, causing Dasra's maimed body to fly from space back into the ancient crystal world and land before him. You and I have neither grievances nor hatred, but for the sake of my wicked heart, I must gore you like a pig and squash you into meat paste. Please forgive me. Conrad chortled while forcing consciousness back into Dasra's regenerating body. With his cultivation level and exceptional physiques, killing him without destroying his soul was, indeed, no mean feat. Conrad raised his hand, summoning a jet-black, spiked warhammer which he lifted above Dasra's torso before bashing it in. Bang! The hammer and spikes dug past Dasra's flesh to hack at his chest while he tumbled and cratered down below. Unwilling to let him off the hook, Conrad pursued, slamming his war hammer into Dasra's maimed form like a blood-crazed madman. Bang, crack, bang. Dasra's bones collapsed, his flesh and blood gushed forth, but thanks to his formidable vitality, he still clung on dear life, allowing Conrad to abuse him to no end before slamming him back into the air with a rising hammer blow. Home. Conrad began while again appearing before Dasra. Run. Bomb. And smashing him tens of thousands of miles into the distance, his life or death unknown. His eyes then turned toward Akash and Nahal, and as soon as they locked onto them, the pair didn't hesitate. Run. To turn heels and run. TSS, TSS, TSS. You come into my land to wreak havoc and demand my life. And when I finally stand before you, you make a getaway? How disappointing. Alas, the world doesn't work like that. Conrad sneered, before hurling his war hammer into Akash's back, and as the Deva tumbled, Conrad reappeared before Nahal. But in the instant he did, from a distance, dozens of green light beams emerged, all rippling with immense demonic energies, all shooting toward him. Chapter 303 Withering Leaves Part 1. Akasha's body had barely crashed onto the ground that the 24 light beams surrounded Conrad, revealing themselves to be 18 dwarf-like men of similar ages and strength. At their helm were 6 pear-shaped beauties that merely stood at 1.6 meters tall. However, the eerie green of their eyes and shining bloodlust within made all appeal they held negligible. The leading 6 boasted an early-stage divine ascension cultivation base, while the remaining 18 all stood at the peak of divine transformation. However, the battle power echoing from their pressure far outpaced the likes of Anatole. And as the 24 surrounded him, Conrad's eyes contorted into a frown. Not only him but Yvonne, Else, Verena, and Astarte were all startled. Clearly, those demons had been there for a substantial amount of time. However, despite their extrasensory abilities, they all failed to sense and locate them. And at this juncture, it didn't take a genius to figure out that they all were zenith ants. They spoke no unnecessary words, and ignoring Nahal, assailed Conrad from all sides. The 18 peak stage divine transformation zenith ants all summoned their lineage weapons to hack at Conrad from all available angles. However, although their battle power far surpassed that of the usual peak divine transformation expert, how could they deter him? Clang. Long before their nihility flails could reach him, Conrad swung his war hammer in a horizontal curve, sending the 18 zenith ants flying backward with a resounding metallic sound. Nahal used the opportunity to vanish, collect Akash and Dasra's bodies, then return to the headquarters. This is not right. Having witnessed this battle, they should know very well that with Conrad's current strength, they do not stand a chance. Why then do they still dare appear with arms bared? Else wondered, her words awakening Yvonne and Verena to the suspiciousness of the situation. And indeed, by the time the 18 male zenith ants were flying backward, 3 of the leading 6 were upon Conrad. Though their cultivation was at the early stage of divine ascension, they each possessed 1 high-grade, mastered divine physique, thus making their battle power impossible to underestimate. However, that was still far from enough. With another hammer swing, Conrad sent them reeling with blood spurts, but undisturbed, they returned with greater fervor, locking him with their flails. "Get lost," Conrad exclaimed, and the dark purple flames coating his armor expanded in a repulsive force that again sent the assailants reeling with various degrees of damage. But at that time, though their bones and organs ached, their lips curled into fiendish grins. The remaining 3 zenith ant ladies used that instant to each fire a projectile toward Conrad, and the trained eye would be startled to see that those 3 projectiles were nothing more than leaves. However, those 3 leaves were all coated in a strange gray force none could recognize. None except, avoid this at all cost, Celine. And as soon as she sensed those leaves, her voice boomed in Conrad's mind. Alas, it was far too late. The 3 leaves slammed against his armor, but instead of colliding with it, as if traversing dimensions, they bypassed its defenses to lodge themselves in Conrad's body. Instantaneously, the leaves each released vast gray fog that spread within Conrad's body, filling every nook and cranny of his inner self. Each leaf held a specific target. The first one aimed at Conrad's cultivation, the second one at his physiques, and the third at his bloodline. And by the time he realized what was occurring, his cultivation, bloodline, and physiques were all sealed by the 3 parasite leaves settled within his body. His eyes widened in a stupor. But that stupor didn't even last the fraction of a second. And as soon as he realized the leaves' effects, Conrad removed his armor, replacing it with his golden imperial robe. Parlor tricks? He sneered as if the leaves held no effect on him, and waved his hand, summoning the second tool he'd gained from the system's 8th quest. A floating, jade-colored throne appeared at his back, and he dropped into it, resting his hands on the throne's arms. This throne was a reward for his harem emperor title. On the one hand, it could drastically weaken women at the divine rank and below while slowly gaining control of their mind. On the other hand, it could channel the strength of all his harem members, regardless of where they stood, to form a protective halo. At the same time, Conrad could use the combined harem power to release 1 strike. Alas, he was limited to 1 per day. But right now, he only held 1 desire: to make sure those zenith ants would fail to assert the leaves' effects on him. As soon as he took position on his throne, the strength of the entire harem gathered within, forming a 50 meters wide protective barrier around him. At the same time, the 6 leading ant ladies felt their minds pervaded by a foreign force that weakened them at a rapid pace. Yvonne, Else, Verena, and Astarte didn't need any order to start a counterattack of their own. Kill! Yvonne bellowed while activating her absolute war sense and barreling into the 6 leading zenith ants. With a swing of Hell's Reach, She tore a large gash in her target's chest while Verena and Else supported her with their seer's vision and Astarte controlled hundreds of artifacts to create openings with her second-layer absolute war sense. At that time, Conrad aimed at the 18 male ants that raised their flails to surround and assault his consorts. A dazzling white light ball formed before his protective screen and turned into a 100 meters wide beam that blasted the 18 male ants below. In tandem, Kron and the concealed Hidden Moon Pavilion experts activated the Jade Capital's formations, releasing dozens of jade-colored beams that slammed into the 6 female demonesses. Capture one, kill the rest, Conrad ordered in a strident tone, but simultaneously sent his consorts messages to let one ant return to the nest. The pressure on his chosen target lessened, and as her partners fell one after the others, she managed to break free of the encirclement and fly back to the colony. The 18 male ants were all butchered. As for the remaining 5, perished while one turned into a captive. Peace finally returned to the Jade Capital. But at the second it did, an alarming scene followed. Pooh! Conrad's eyes went bloodshot, and he spurted a large mouthful of blood before tumbling from his throne and dropped toward the ground. Chapter 304 Withering Leaves Part 2. Conrad, Master, Your Majesty. Several voices exclaimed and shot toward Conrad's dropping form. Yvonne arrived first, stopping him mid-fall by wrapping her hands around his waist. Gray vein lines covered his face, neck, torso, and spread toward the entirety of his body while blood trickled down his lips. And following a brief examination, Yvonne was startled to see that from Conrad's previously mighty body, she could now feel not the tiniest bit of cultivation. For all intents and purposes, he seemed no different than a mortal having yet to step on the cultivation road. With just 3 leaves? How could this be? From Z's and Vilk's minds, Verena and Else didn't see the mention of those leaves, and therefore, failed to understand the root of their ability. However, it didn't take a genius to figure out they were somehow connected to the Withering World Tree. First bring him back to the tower, then we can choose the next course of action. Else offered, and instantaneously, all vanished to reappear within the Empyrean Tower's concealed paradise where Conrad's floating castle and personal cultivation chambers remained. After laying him down on the bed, Yvonne attempted a healing spell, but to no avail. Else then followed, using her Batet lineage's life sea to feed Conrad's body. The yellow sea dived past his pores to nourish and supplement both his inner and outer shell. At the same time, Verena and Yvonne renewed their healing spells to support Elsa's effort. Meanwhile, Kron, whose link to Conrad was the strongest, oversaw the evolution of his condition. After 3 hours of dumping her life sea into Conrad's body, Elsa's porcelain white skin grew pale, and her knees quivered as she teetered on her feet. Still, she didn't relent, carrying on until the last bit of strength left her body, and she too collapsed on the ground. Kron's eyes shone with gravity. Master's current condition is critical. At a glance, it doesn't seem life-threatening. However, if left unchecked, I really can't say if he can live past this year. Kron professed, his words causing an uproar within Conrad's consorts. What do you mean by this? Yvonne asked while suppressing the emotional roller coaster her heart was turning into. The 3 leaves currently trapped within Master's body are withering leaves born from a world tree's withering. 1 leaf is enough to seal the target's cultivation base. A second will seal the physiques, and a third will lock the bloodline, thus turning the afflicted into a mortal. Master's sudden fall and coma is a result of his abrupt descent into mortality. Thanks to Lady Elsa's life sea, he should regain consciousness in at most a week. Kron began, and as his words echoed, the eyes of all those surrounding him widened in disbelief. Impossible, Master's means are unending. With a wave of his hand, he can bestow the world's highest bloodlines and achieve unprecedented feats. I refuse to believe that a trivial dying tree can hold him down. Astarte exclaimed, her words ringing true within the minds of her fellow harem members. However, Kron sighed. I'm afraid it's not that simple. If there was only one, perhaps there could be room for maneuver. But with three, Master's life is now linked to the world trees. If it dies, he dies. If it lives, he lives. The withering is his withering. Kron roared in frustration and slapped his thigh as his words ended. Although, as a familiar, his life was bound to Conrad's, in that instant, he cared little for it, only lamenting his inability to assist his master in his time of need. What about his ancient secrets? Yvonne directly asked, unwilling to let fright and apprehension settle within her mind. The ancient secrets transcend cultivation laws. Master can still rely on and study them. However, better than anyone, you should know that absolute war sense relies on spiritual sense, while seer's vision evolves from origin sight but thrives on soul power. In his current condition, even if he can comprehend the principles, Master can use neither. Kron explained with downcast eyes. But he can still use the blossoming death art? Yes. Kron replied to Yvonne's last inquiry, and hearing this, she heaved a sigh of relief. If the blossoming death art is unaffected, then this is easy to solve. If he perishes, he will be reincarnated in another one of his death flowers. That being the case, there is no need for excessive worries, Yvonne declared, attempting to alleviate the new wave of emotions spreading within the harem, and though Kron didn't comment, he inwardly disagreed. The reason was simple. Although Yvonne spoke true, and death would allow Conrad to escape the withering, due to their intrinsic connection and the flame mark's memories, he knew of what others didn't. The system. If Conrad perished in body and soul, although he would indeed be reincarnated within another death flower, Kron firmly believed that the system wouldn't follow him in rebirth. The system had played a critical role in the Jade Dynasty's meteoric rise, and though as an individual, Conrad was relatively independent of it, for his faction and harem members, it was another story. To say nothing of the rest, the Valkyrie armors alone would vanish into nothingness. For their faction's overall strength, that would be a critical blow. Of course, he wouldn't speak the words. Verena, use Seer's vision on the female we captured to capture as much information as possible. Yvonne ordered, and immediately, Verena got to work, scrutinizing the Zenith Ant captive's past to uncover all it contained. As an elder, her position within the colony stood leagues above that of Ziz and Vyalk, and she naturally had access to critical information. Through her past, they were not only able to confirm Kron's words, but also managed to get a full picture of the Zenith Ants' hierarchy. They were a matriarchy, with the Ant Queens being the highest body the elders could contact. Above them was the Ant Goddess. There were 27 Ant Queens in total, each with a peak stage divine ascension cultivation base, top-level bloodline, and more than one high-grade, mastered divine physique. As for the Ant Goddess, her cultivation was hard to put in words. At least, for the elders it was. The queens all resided within the roots of the world tree, while the goddess stood infinitely close to its base. As the world tree withered, their strength continually rose. The inversely proportional rise allowing Verena and Yvonne to hypothesize their real goal. Moreover, it appeared that over the years, the elders had managed to expand the colony's control over a substantial amount of the hidden forest powerhouses and the forces they led. We can't sit and wait for death. Be it for Conrad or for the sake of our faction's future, the world tree's withering must be averted. The Zenith Ant leaders can't be allowed to drain the world tree of its last bit of vitality. I will immediately depart for the hidden forest to investigate the situation and seek ways to abort these events, Yvonne proclaimed, and as soon as the words left her lips, Verena nodded in approval. I will assist you, and decided to follow suit. Thus, Verena and Yvonne departed from the Jade capital to sneak into the barbarian continent and head straight toward the hidden forest. Chapter 305 Coping with the Chain. Following an uncertain duration of unconsciousness, Conrad's limbs trembled, with his quivering eyelids announcing his awakening. In slow motion, his eyes opened, and at first, a blurred world awaited him. But as he lifted himself from his bed, clear sight gradually replaced the blurry vision. Elsa's sitting form was the first his eyes fell upon. Clearly, she'd been there for some time, watching over him as he slumbered. Meanwhile, Astarte and Zamira stood several steps away from the bed, observing him from a distance. Conrad said nothing, raising his pale-looking hand to access his own body. And unsurprisingly, no cultivation or battle power remained within. The only things he could now rely on were his system gained abilities and the blossoming death art. But neither of those were offensive in nature, at least, not in their current state. The current him simply didn't have the strength to truss a chicken. From a god-level existence all the way down to a feeble mortal. This was indeed a meteoric descent. But of course, although his strength was now not worth mentioning, thanks to his vast death essence, his incomparably formidable resilience remained. At least, he wasn't entirely without defense. "How long have I been out?" Conrad asked Celine within the system. 8 days. And before you ask, I have no way to remove the leaves. That is a true god-level ability. The current system is simply not equipped for that. Sorry. She replied in an apologetic tone, causing Conrad's lips curled into a smile. It's fine. It's perfectly fine. Who is to say that this is not an opportunity? Conrad chortled before shifting his attention back onto Else. Hers had never left him, and within, worry clearly shone. But how could it not? To any cultivator, the loss of strength was an insufferable blow. Else firmly believed that Conrad wouldn't think twice before asking one of his paramount knights to execute him so that he could be reborn, free of this affliction. However, as he shook his head in disapproval, she realized he had no intention to. The situation is not as terrible as you think. This might just be a blessing in disguise. For too long, I've reveled in my superior cultivation foundation, bloodline, and physiques. There are many profound mysteries I do not grasp, mysteries I can now pursue as a mortal. Conrad began while lowering his right hand onto Elsa's and sweeping the 3 consorts with a calm gaze. Moreover, I still have my Legion and Hidden Moon Pavilion. This is merely a temporary setback. Right now, we must hasten the Legion's training and bring the remaining 5,000 peak restoration beasts to the Infernal Knight rank. At the same time, invest more resources in the training of the weaker Infernal Knights. Kron. As soon as Conrad called his name, Kron appeared within the room and dropped on his knees. At your command. You will be in charge of this, Conrad ordered, and Kron bowed in approval. Where are Yvonne and Verena? He asked immediately afterward. After getting a new understanding of the situation, Her Majesty and Her Grace decided to sneak into the hidden forest to gather information, get the full picture, and devise a method to abort the withering. Kron explained, his words causing a frown to flash within Conrad's face. Else then pressed her palm against his forehead, flooding his mind with the recent intel and her full knowledge of the situation. With his eyes shut close, Conrad pulled in a deep sigh. Understood. His eyes again opened and locked on Zamira, whose eyes were the only 100% serene one within the room. What are your thoughts? Conrad inquired with a smile. If you are not worried, why should I be? Just like you said, this might just be an opportunity. In any case, you can just reincarnate yourself. At the same time, the incomparably formidable Hidden Moon Pavilion stands, ready to defend you from all harms. Throughout the ancient crystal world, the unknown ant queens and goddess aside, who do you fear? Cultivation or not, you're still the Jade Emperor. You're still the Profane Prince, the God Sovereign of 50 billion souls. This is as a big deal as we make it out to be. Zamira responded in a calm, level tone, her words causing the restless Astarte to blush in shame. Well said. Conrad approved and stood up. It is time we fulfill old promises. The 3 of you should get ready to step into the barbarian continent, Conrad declared, and his words caused no surprise. None expected him to quietly await Yvonne's return. Of course, he would step into the barbarian continent. Of course, he would support her efforts. First, we will restore Zamira's tribe. Afterward, we will infiltrate the infernal cult and pay a visit to my dear mother. Conrad explained. The Circa-ruled infernal cult's current situation was a mystery. Initially, Diana and Miraz served as his eyes and ears within. However, it quickly became evident that following the last war, they had been disconnected of all critical information. But at the same time, no harm befell them, and on the contrary, their already superior treatment within the house experienced substantial improvement. Clearly, Gulistan suspected foul play on his part and balanced the potential spies, preventing them from accessing critical information while urging them to focus on cultivation. Soon, it would be time for the two of them to clash. The three consorts nodded in approval before exiting to give Conrad some time to adjust to his new condition. Master, your servant was incompetent and failed to assist you at the critical juncture. As a familiar, I am overwhelmed by shame. Please allow me to follow you into the barbarian continent. Kron implored with a kowtow. However, Conrad shook his head. You are my most reliable servant. I need you here in the capital to oversee activities and defend the fort while I'm away. Don't worry, I will take 2 paramount knights and 10 quasi-paramount knights with me on this trip. My safety is guaranteed. Hearing Conrad's uncompromising tone, Kron knew he wouldn't be part of the departing party. But as he inwardly lamented, Conrad's voice again echoed. As for your guilt, that is utter nonsense. I can only blame myself for not being sufficiently prepared. Conrad professed with a smile. Thank you, Master. No need. Summon Wenzel von Jürgen. I have something to ask him. Conrad ordered, and immediately, Kron departed to bring in Wenzel. The former 6th von Jürgen prince and Yvonne's adopted son, Wenzel had been butchered by Ulrich under a moment of flaring madness, alongside Yvonne's faithful eunuchs. However, Conrad sealed their souls within a soul lamp, ready to bring them back to life at the first opportunity. And upon taking his Jade Emperor throne, he did just that, granting them new, mightier bodies that allowed them to quickly reach sainthood. In a flash, Wenzel appeared before him and knelt in greetings. All hail, your majesty, he exclaimed in veneration. Dispense with ceremony. Did she leave any words? Conrad straightforwardly asked. Adoptive mother only said that. Wenzel began but failed to finish the words. And seeing him quivering on his knees, Conrad's interest was piqued. Speak without fear. I absolve you of any potential crime. Hearing this, Wenzel heaved a sigh of relief and carried on. She said that if she had to say anything, she would divorce you. Wenzel replied without raising his head, and as the words reached his ears, Conrad burst into laughter. That's my empress. Now, time for the profane prince to go on a vacation. As his beloved empress, how could Conrad not understand the meaning of Yvonne's words? If this bit of setback is enough to startle you, then I chose wrong and you're not worth being my husband. That aside, I will naturally try my hardest to fix this for you. But naturally, he would never allow her to do all the work. Chapter 306 Human Blood Burning. Conrad spent the remainder of the day alongside Kron to restructure the resources assigned to the Legion, the Hidden Forces, and the State Army while getting accustomed to his feeble body. At dusk, he headed into the official research department where the former Dowager Amalia conducted experiments on various human subjects to analyze the root of their bloodlines. Lost in her experiments, Amalia wouldn't even have noticed the arrival of the new entrant, were it not for her fellow researchers and assistants dropping on their knees to proclaim, "Greetings, Your Majesty." As those words echoed, mild surprise flashed within her eyes, and she spun to lock her attention on Conrad, who'd now stepped in. Just like the others, she dropped on her knees. "Greetings, Your Majesty. You may rise," Conrad replied while bypassing the kneeling researchers to stop beside Amalia. His eyes fell upon several men of various ages tied on vertical beds with thick iron chains preventing any movement. Those were criminals his forces routinely delivered to the research department for experimenting. Amalia stood up, standing beside him while keeping her head slightly bowed in deference. "Your Majesty, may your servant know what prompts such a sudden visit?" she asked with her hands wrapped around a diary she kept pressed against her chest. "What is the current evolution of your researches?" Conrad replied through an inquiry of his own. And hearing this, Amalia's lips curled into a smile. "In those last 10 years, although we failed to decipher the nature of humanity's lineage, we did make an interesting discovery that supports your hypothesis. I now have very little doubt that human lineages are under a potent seal." Amalia replied, causing Conrad to arch his eyebrows. "Oh, and what is that discovery?" "As your Majesty knows, there are 3 kinds of burning: life force burning, blood burning, and soul burning. Life force burning multiplies the might of cultivation proportionally to the quantity of lifespan expended. In the same process, blood burning increases the might of both cultivation and physiques, while soul burning targets cultivation and soul power." Amalia began, drawing an approving nod from Conrad. "However, because blood and soul burning are both fatal and excruciating, only the desperate dare use them. Moreover, unless the user possesses mighty physiques or vast soul power, to begin with, the result is not much better than life force burning. Therefore, instances of their uses are not many. However, following some experiments, we realized that a low-level human burning his blood will yield a much larger strength upgrade than the vast majority of the ancient Crystal World's races." As her words ended, Amalia waved her hand, causing her assistants to bring in a tide, former beast noble which they set beside a middle-aged human male. They both possessed low, true knight cultivation. Using pills, we forcefully brought that human's cultivation level to the true knight rank. With his blue blood lineage, he's barely qualified to step on the cultivation road, but unless he meets a startling fortuitous encounter, his future achievements are doomed to be limited. The blue blood was the weakest of humanity's cultivation lineages. Therefore, Conrad agreed with the words. At his right is a former beast noble with an inarguably stronger bloodline. Although their cultivations are the equal, with other conditions remaining the same, the beast noble would shred him to pieces in a fight. However, your Majesty will now see the result of their blood burning." Amalia sent various mental messages toward her assistants while motioning for them to step toward the test subjects. 2 assistants stepped in, bringing a syringe filled with an odd, dark red liquid and injecting them into the patients. As the sting punctured their veins and the liquid dived in, their eyes widened in muffled pain and went bloodshot. The assistants soon withdrew the needles, and bringing alongside them the other patients, left the room, closing it behind them. Now, only the middle-aged human and former beast noble remained. "This is a serum we invented to forcefully trigger blood burning. May your Majesty wait a few seconds," Amalia explained with her lips curved in anticipation. Soon afterward, the 2 subjects' bodies trembled as they convulsed within their chains. The convulsing soon made way for full-blown thrashing, and their eyes went red with mad frenzy. The chains are supported by a reinforcement formation that prevents anyone beneath the Arch Knight rank from escaping them. However, clang clang clang, while the beast noble still struggled to free himself from his seemingly irresistible chains, the middle-aged human blasted them all away in loud ringing noises before leaping from his bed to land on the ground. "Rayoror," he roared, but the glass vitrine separating him from his abductors prevented him from seeing what occurred in the outside. Blazing with maddened rage, he turned toward the former beast noble who still thrashed against his chains and punched a hole into his chest. In an eruption of blood, the former beast noble's struggle ended, and perhaps his soul would find respite in the fact that his chains were now broken. With nothing else to batter, the frenzied human spur and shot toward the vitrine, punching it with all his might, but to no avail. Following 5 minutes of thrashing, blood erupted from his orifices, his heart ruptured, and he collapsed on the ground. Conrad was astounded. "As your Majesty can see, This low-level human's blood burning allowed him to showcase battle power 2 ranks above his own. And this is just a blue-blooded human. I can only imagine what a purple or golden-blooded human's lineage burning would result in. Of course, this is merely 5 minutes of glory before an immutable death. Amalia concluded, but as she shifted her silver eyes toward Conrad to assess his reaction, she was startled to see the bright smile plastered on his lips. Good. Very, very good. He appraised with a nod. Could an undead human use the ability without limit? He asked right afterward, but Amalia shook her head. In the current ancient crystal world, necromancy is a failed art whose practitioners lie hidden in damp caves. The undead they create are of low quality, mangled, decaying flesh, or sacks of bones. Very few still possess slivers of their souls, to say nothing of the lineage of their lifetime. She sighed, but soon afterward, raised her head. However, if one could create a perfect undead boasting a complete lineage, then yes, endless blood burning should be possible. Those words were like music to Conrad's ears, and his smile only grew more radiant. You, my beautiful Amalia, have done this state a great service. I will increase the funding for your department, and tonight, you can come into the Imperial Palace to fetch your personal rewards. Conrad chortled and turned heels, leaving without further words. Not having expected those results to yield such prizes, Amalia was startled. However, her surprise only lasted for the split of a second, and she bowed toward Conrad's departing form. Thank you, Your Majesty, for your grace. Chapter 307 Into the Land of Organized Anarchy. As Conrad left the research department, Celine's voice echoed within his mind. What are you planning to do? She asked in a puzzled tone. Having spent years in ancient crystal world time, but decades, in truth, by Conrad's side, Celine knew better than anyone that he didn't tolerate self-weakness. Strength was his throne. There was no way he would accept a situation of only being able to rely on others for long. Moreover, his reaction within Amalia's research lab seemed to hint at some new development. In the current ancient crystal world, we face 2 enemies, the 300 Devis and the Zenith Ants. Among the Devis, Akash, Nahal, and Dasra are the strongest, with Dasra being the mightiest of them all. However, he was gruesomely mangled by me. Even with his powerful vitality, to recover from those wounds will take a substantial amount of time. Meanwhile, they don't know of my real situation. Therefore, even when he recovers, they will not rashly step back in the Holy Continent. On that front, we're safe. However, the Zenith Ants are another story. While the Elder level and below are easy to deter, no one knows the full depth of the leaders. Judging by the Elder's strength, the Ant Queens are at least Akash level, perhaps even stronger. Meanwhile, the Ant Goddess is the primary beneficiary of the World Tree's vitality. I hypothesize that even if she can't step into godhood due to the mortal realm's laws, her battle power must have long since reached that level. Perhaps even Dasra is not her match. That being the case, we're in a very passive situation. Once the Queens and Goddess emerge from the World Tree, with our current strength, we're doomed to destruction. I cannot sit and wait for death. I must master it, breed a new, invincible force, and turn this feeble body into an unparalleled weapon. To that end, I will have to take some drastic measures and become crueler. Hearing this, Celine was startled. It was already no exaggeration to say Conrad easily ranked among the most ferocious creatures of the universe, perhaps even of the multiverse. Having refined the death essence of more than 60 million, what could he possibly do to become crueler? But like the others, she would have to wait to find out. Don't forget the 9th level of the main quest. Although you got a tremendous amount of time, the requirements are not simple. Among the hosts I've been with, 99% failed at this level. Celine reminded. I naturally won't. If with his resources and accomplishments, the 8th level of the main quest didn't require much effort, the 9th was a massive pitfall. All conditions were reasonable, except for one. 5,000 divine rank harem members. That night, after dealing with Amelia's rewards, Conrad slept like an ordinary mortal. Though, due to the 3 leaves linking him to the world tree's withering, that night was anything but peaceful. At dawn, he rose, bringing alongside him 2 paramount knights and 10 quasi-paramount knights to meet with Else, Astarte, and Zamira, who already awaited him in the throne room. Say farewell to the capital. We won't be back for some time. Conrad started with a smile while stepping toward them. On this trip, we will disguise as slave traders. Zamira's tribeswomen will remain within a space treasure until we're ready to settle them. He declared with a beckoning gesture, motioning for them to follow. And so they did. After exiting the palace, they turned into light beams to shoot toward the Holy Continent's border. As Conrad was now deprived of cultivation, he naturally didn't have flight ability. One of his 2 paramount knight ladies had to serve as both car and driver to bring him alongside them. Once they reached the border, he summoned a carriage he prepared beforehand, alongside a convoy of beast noble slaves, then sat within the large carriage. Else, Zamira, and Astarte took their seats within, while the 12 hidden Moon Pavilion experts vanished in the shadows to follow the carriage in silence. They then departed, crossing the northern border to step into the barbarian continent's northern kingdom, or northern khanate as the locals referred it to. Conrad was startled to see that it didn't even take 3 hours of driving before they met their first bandit raid. One hour afterward, they met another, and another, and again another. In less than 24 hours, they'd come across 8 bandit attacks of various scales. As the 9th approached, and the concealed hidden Moon Pavilion experts again beheaded the offenders, Conrad could no longer hold back. What kind of nonsense is this? Are there any laws in this land? Although this is nothing more than outer territory and we stand close to border tribes, isn't this a tad bit too ridiculous? He asked while resting his head on Elsa's lap and his legs on Astarte's. However, Zamira shook her head. In the barbarian continent, banditry is perfectly legal. Bandits are not executed for the act, but for getting caught. Moreover, there are cases where even getting caught will yield no consequence. Zamira replied, and hearing this, Conrad arched his eyebrows. The barbarian continent's denizens only know one truth: might. Anything else is irrelevant. Birth order, gender, humanity, neither of those matter. As you probably know, barbarians rule by might. Most Khans do not inherit their thrones, but seize it by butchering their predecessor. For the same reason, family values are not as profound as within the Holy Continent. Moreover, just like strong men can have several women, strong women can have several men too. Else pursued while stroking Conrad's hairs. Having spent a tremendous amount of time fighting and killing within the barbarian continent, Astarte wasn't startled. And recalling all the differences between the barbarian and holy continents, she couldn't help but sigh. Although the notion of tribes hints at a primitive organization, it would be a mistake to believe the barbarian continent wholly rural. Only the provincial and border tribes adopt such a setting. Deeper are affluent towns, cities, metropolises, and megalopolises, just like within the holy continent. And within those cities, tribes refer to themselves as clans, with the royal clan standing above all. However, lawlessness still reigns. Or rather, an ordered form of lawlessness is present. On top of taxes, merchants must pay a monthly protection tithe to the state if they wish to obtain its protection. In fact, anyone that doesn't pay protection tithes is not entitled to state protection and can be bullied at will. Those with state protection are easily recognizable by the state emblem they wear. Attacking them is attacking the state. Not many are bold enough to risk the consequences. But for those who can neither afford the emblem nor protect themselves, life is usually tragic. I've seen many get slain in broad daylight, with no one paying them heed. Astarte continued, her words causing Conrad to blink in disbelief. I knew the barbarian continent tumultuous, but not to this extent. How did such a crazed civilization survive 100,000 years? He couldn't help but ask. You need to remember that above it all, The infernal cult and its branches unite the land in faith. Meanwhile, the Circers rule everything from the shadows. The entirety of the barbarian continent's secular world, from the economy to the military, is Circer-ruled. All the large merchant houses and trading companies belong to House Circer in a way or another. In fact, the 4 royal clans and the Khans are Circer descendants. On Circer standards, their ancestors couldn't cut it in the main house and were expelled to serve in the secular world. Of course, if any of the clansmen shows enough talent, he can return to the main house to receive more resources and better training. The main requirement is to awaken a purple bloodline. Else clarified, and as her words ended, they reached a border tribe which overflowed with resounding bluster. Chapter 308 Death is not the end. Part 1. This is former Borkson territory, though now, I suppose it's been partitioned among several tribes. Indeed, the former Borkson tribe's territory was split in 3, with the Aran tribe now occupying these lands. Zamira and Astarte explained in turn as they approached the border tribe. Meanwhile, Else fed Conrad a succession of strawberries. Which reminds me, why didn't Ulrich annex the territory? Conrad asked between 2 berries. The Borkson tribe was a large border tribe. Back then, under Ulrich's orders, Wolfgang's army conquered the people, seized all available resources, but didn't keep the territory. The topography here is different from the Holy Continent. The border tribes are easy to attack but hard to defend. Although the Holy Flame Empire's troops could have annexed the land, soon afterward, they would have lost it. Moreover, the nearby forests are infested with demonic beasts that would rain upon the newcomers. Capturing such a place is meaningless. Only barbarian tribes are fit to occupy it. Zamira clarified in a somewhat absent-minded tone, as if reminiscing the past as she spoke. As I recall, this tribe's top expert is a first-step transcendent knight. They don't have any formation master. Therefore, their defenses are relatively weak, even on the area's standards. For a border tribe to survive across centuries, relying on a few formation masters was inevitable. In the decades it occupied this territory, this Aran tribe had always been in a precarious situation. Were it not for the Holy Flame Empire not finding a need to dispatch troops back in this area, they would have long since been exterminated. What's your intent? I know you didn't bother stopping here just to help my folks recover their territory. With the Jade Dynasty's current strength, you only need to casually dispatch a commander from the state's army to take care of the area. Hell, I could do it by myself. Zamira began, and Conrad nodded in approval. Indeed, we're not here for a simple restoration. In fact, you'll have to delay the actual takeover for a little bit. But rejoice, I'm giving you the Northern Khanate in its entirety. Conrad replied in a mild chuckle, causing Zamira's eyes to widen in disbelief. What do you mean by that? Within the barbarian continent's secular world, I have objectives. The first is to force the Circer-ruled infernal cult out of seclusion. As you know, those damnable Circers obtained a massive quantity of merit from the slaughter of 1 billion citizens and some boons from Asherah and Urzel. Asherah granted them a blood barrier that prevents anyone beneath godhood from stepping in unauthorized. Therefore, their headquarters is in an impregnable position. Conrad explained while crunching another strawberry else lowered onto his lips. Since we can't use force to gain entrance, let's try setting the garden on fire. We first take over the Northern Khanate, then have it invade the other 3, turn the barbarian continent into a chaotic battlefield where none can find peace. At the very least, that should allow us to lure some rats out. For that level of trouble, they will at best dispatch low-level protectors. We catch them, convert them, and have them sneak us in. Since my demonic powers are disabled, Else will do the conversion. Conrad pursued, causing the consort's eyes to expand further. Is that really necessary? I'm sure there must be more covert ways to gain access. How about relying on Diana, Miraz, Genera, and Vozer? Astarte inquired. Miraz, Genera, and Voser were the infernal cult spies Conrad gained from the tower, while Diana was Guliston's disciple and one of his latest harem addition back in those days. But while they all possessed high status, their current situation within the cult was odd, to say the least. If we use them, on the one hand, the result is uncertain. On the other hand, we prove Guliston's caution right. I don't mind either. But what I do mind is her being aware of my presence in the barbarian continent before I'm willing to reveal it. But of course, that is only one reason. The second one leads us to the real reason for my presence in this land. Death. I need people to die in mass. Not in the thousands, not in the hundreds of thousands or millions. No, at least hundreds of millions, and perhaps even billions. The startling words echoed within the carriage, causing Elsa's strawberry-feeding hand to stop, while Zamira and Astarte no longer knew what to say. But their stupor wouldn't last for long, because as the carriage approached the entrance of the bustling Aran tribe, guards blocked its path. Though death may not be their end. Come, let me show you what I mean, Conrad declared and stood up, stepping out alongside his beauties who followed at his back. There, two olive-skinned guardsmen dressed in brown fur and leather armor blocked their carriage's path. The two men's cultivation merely stood at the true knight rank, but unable to grasp the depth of those they blocked, they showed no fear. In any case, although in the recent years the practice was growing increasingly infrequent, clandestine Holy Continent merchant carriages passing by wasn't that infrequent a sight. Conrad ignored them, his eyes peering into the distance toward the amalgam of tents that formed the Aran tribe. The tents weren't without structure. The closer they stood to the entrance, and the less land surrounded them, the lower their status within the tribe was. As a system ability, Origin Sight didn't vanish alongside the loss of Conrad's cultivation. And using it, he could see everything occurring within the tribe. And seeing that the source of the bluster was nothing more than a mass human sacrifice, his lips curled into a smile. If you wish to cross our land, you must pay the toll and surrender 10% of your Slav. The guards began, but when their eyes locked on Else, Zamira and Astarte, any word on their tongue flew back down their throats, unwilling to disturb the beauty feast dazzling their eyes. Seeing their reaction, Conrad resolved to have the three wear masks in the future. He raised his right hand, and out of nowhere, a gentle breeze blew on the two guards' necks. In one clean cut, their heads flew, and from beginning to end, they never saw the silhouette of their killers and the origin of their deaths. With a grasping motion, Conrad absorbed their souls and extracted the death essence produced by their demises. But unlike the infernal soul-devouring art, the blossoming death art didn't refine the souls, instead trapping them within its user for later use. Before the two's bodies could drop on the ground, Conrad pulled them into a space ring, then stepped into the Aran tribe with his riveting beauties at his heels. Just like him, they'd already swept the tribe with their origin sight, and with their understanding of the border tribes, the sight of human males tied on burning poles for an impending sacrifice didn't startle them. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.